Good morning, everybody. It's 7 o'clock. Coming up on the programme for you this morning, Donald Trump says the UK is out of line, but holds out hope that tariffs can be avoided.
No such positivity for Europe, which he brands an atrocity. Keir Starmer will meet leaders in Brussels later today.
And from the world stage, we'll take you to the red carpet, bringing you all the highlights from this year's Grammy Awards.
It's Monday, the 3rd of February. Boos for the US national anthem in Toronto as Donald Trump warns he'll impose tariffs on Europe. Next.
UK is out of line, but I'm sure that one, I think that one can be worked out. But the European Union it's an atrocity.
Markets have slumped across Asia this morning. I'll have the latest from Beijing.
Also ahead, 1 dead and thousands forced to flee from floods in Australia. Could there be hope for Sir Rod Stewart and thousands of others, pothole campaigners, with roads that fix themselves?
Cowboy Carter. Beyonce.
And Beyonce finally wins Best Album at the Grammys. Good morning, everybody. The Asian markets have slumped this morning after Donald Trump launched what appears to be a global trade war. He's imposed severe tariffs on Canada, Mexico and China and warned that the European Union will be next. The issue is sure to dominate the agenda as the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, holds talks with European leaders in Brussels. Mari has more.
This is what basketball fans in Toronto think of Donald Trump. A few hours after he announced a steep 25% tariff on goods from Canada and Mexico, nearly 20,000 of them booed the US anthem.
I would just say to our allies around the world, watch this closely. You could be next. And in the meantime, stand by your friends.
And as Keir Starmer heads to Brussels this morning, it's Europe next in the president's sights.
European Union is really out of line. UK is out of line, but I'm sure that one, I think that one can be worked out. But the European Union it's an atrocity. Prime Minister Starmer has been very nice. We've had a couple of meetings. We've had numerous phone calls. We're getting along very well. And we'll see whether or not we can balance out our budget. With the European Union, it's $350 billion deficit. So obviously something's going to take place there.
Difficult questions then about how the UK navigates the troubled waters ahead. With tariffs of 10% already announced on Chinese goods too, from clothes to smartphones, we are seeing an escalating global trade war. And Donald Trump appears to be enjoying it, saying this morning that anybody that loves and believes in the United States of America is in favour of tariffs. They should have never ended. In favour of the income tax system in 1913, the response to tariffs has been fantastic. Not so fantastic is the reaction of the markets in Asia, which have slumped on early trading. Mari Aurora, Sky News.
Nicole in Beijing for us this morning. Hello to you, Nicole. What are the markets doing?
Well, the markets are definitely shaken across Asia this morning. Everywhere you look, South Korea, Japan, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Australia, all of them down 1 to 2%. Now, we haven't had a reaction here on mainland China, and that's because we're still in the middle of Chinese New Year. So the markets here won't open until Wednesday. But also Asian car companies, the Hyundais, Nissan, Mazda, those big companies that we've heard so much about, they also took a hit, many of them down 5 to 7.5%. It goes to show just how interconnected the global market is these days, because a lot of those companies have opened factories and manufacturing plants in Mexico. So they know that they will be hit by a 25% tariff for any cars they try to export into the United States. As for China, though, China has that 10% tariff. They're taking a fairly careful, considered approach so far. We haven't had any strong language or rhetoric from the Chinese. They're still talking about dialogue and negotiation. They have said that there will be unspecified countermeasures at some stage. They haven't explained what they are, but there has been ongoing tit-for-tat trade retaliation between the United States and China for months now. And also China has said that they will take the US to the World Trade Organization. That will probably have no major impact, but it's definitely a symbolic move for the Chinese. They have pushed back once again on the statements from President Trump, blaming Chinese companies for providing the precursor chemicals. These are the chemicals that are used to make fentanyl by Mexican cartels that are then sent into the United States, which is one of the reasons that President Trump has put these 10% tariffs on China. So as for the reaction here, we'll have to wait and see for the markets to open on mainland China on Wednesday, but it's definitely rattled the rest of this region because they know that eventually, once Trump is done with Mexico, Canada, the European Union, potentially the UK, he could turn his sights to the rest of Asia.
OK, for now, thank you. We're going to speak to Reform MP Richard Tice in the next few moments and the government at 7:30. One person has been killed and thousands of others have been forced to flee from floods in northeastern Australia. Our Australia reporter Lauren Forbes is at the centre of the floods in Townsville and sent us this update.
Well, the floodwaters here in Townsville have receded, but the danger is far from over. More relentless rain is on the way. Now, I'm located in one of those low-lying areas near one of the main rivers, the Ross River, that have been ordered to evacuate, causing thousands of residents to flee as of yesterday afternoon. Now, they are being warned not to return despite these floodwaters receding, and that's because it could quickly turn deadly. Now, we've already seen this disaster claiming the life of a 63-year-old woman. That's when an SES boat, an emergency boat, capsized yesterday afternoon. Now, at the moment, we have Australian Defence personnel stationed here in Townsville, ready to act if conditions worsen and take a turn for the worse. At the moment, we do have roads, our major roads, the Bruce Highway, which takes you in and out of the city, cut off. And we've even seen bridges collapse from this heavy rainfall that we've copped over the last few days.
Rest of today's news for you now. Here's Gareth.
Good morning.
Morning.
Yes. Turn attention to the Middle East. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has now arrived in the United States ahead of a diplomatic visit with President Donald Trump. Tuesday's meeting at the White House will be Trump's first with a foreign leader since returning to office. It comes as Arab and US mediators begin to broker the next phase of the Gaza ceasefire process. There have been large protests in Los Angeles against the new immigration policies of the Trump administration, which include ramping up arrests of illegal immigrants and promises of mass deportations. Hundreds of people took to the streets waving Mexican flags and banners and blocked sections of busy highways in the city. As we've just been showing you, this image of the sister of a head teacher who took her own life says proposed changes to Ofsted's inspection rating system are dangerous. Ruth Perry's sister says that while the move from single-word judgments to more detailed report cards does make some improvements, it introduces a series of potential new risks to teachers' well-being. Ofsted says the changes will allow them to highlight specific issues and make grading fairer. And you might be having to shell out for your Easter egg this year. That's because the price of cocoa is up 143% compared to a year ago, leading to a steep increase in the cost of chocolate. It's due to extreme weather over the last year across Western Africa, where much of the world's cocoa is grown.
Siobhan's here with us. Sir Rod Stewart will be doing a Snoopy dance this morning, won't he?
Yes, that's because potentially his issue with potholes could be solved after researchers have found a special ingredient which could help without pothole crisis. Did you know, Kay, that according to the RAC, drivers can expect to experience around 6 potholes per mile when they're travelling? That's
really?
It's one way of measuring the distance, isn't it? How many potholes have you come across? Now, this is a serious problem. Not only is it dangerous, but it's also expensive too. People like Rod Stewart, who you've just named, took it upon themselves to try and fix this issue. He had complained previously that he wasn't able to drive his Ferraris due to the condition of the roads.
First world problem.
But he also pointed out that an ambulance had also burst a tyre due to the really poor conditions where he lived in Essex. And now, though, researchers, which includes scientists from Google and also King's College London, believe that they have the solution to the problem. And part of that solution is using recycled cooking oil. Now, it's quite...
How does that work, then?
Well, I'm not going to suggest that our viewers go out and start pouring cooking oil in the streets. It is far more complex. They use artificial intelligence to be able to really figure out how to solve this issue. So the reason why potholes appear is because, one, drivers are sort of driving on roads, cracks can form. When water gets into these cracks and freezes, they can expand and therefore create these huge potholes in the road. Now, these scientists have used artificial intelligence to develop an asphalt mix which contains tiny oil-filled particles made from plant waste. Now, these spores release oil when the cracks appear in the road and then heal themselves. So it could potentially save an awful lot of money. It's estimated that drivers end up spending around 570 million due to damage to their vehicles. That was the highest figure on record last year. But the cost to fix these roads is far higher. It's between 14 and 16 billion. So by having this material, this self-healing asphalt, it could potentially save drivers and the government an awful lot of money.
Wow, that's amazing. You know the app, the Waze motoring app, and it says pothole. I don't even bother doing it anymore because there's just so many of them.
Yeah, but it is one way to concentrate, isn't it, on the road?
We always concentrate when we're on the road. Are you a Grammys fan?
I am, yes.
I'm glad you are, because it was the biggest night of the year for the music industry last night, and a night of tributes to those who've been working tirelessly during the California wildfires. Sabrina Carpenter, Charlie XCX, and Chappelle Rowan all dazzled on the stage, and Beyonce finally won the award for the Album of the Year. Here's our arts and entertainment correspondent, Katie Spencer.
A night of tributes to a city still reeling. With whole neighbourhoods now ash, host Trevor Noah explaining.
We weren't sure tonight that this show would even happen. I mean, you don't need me to tell you this, but this city has just been through one of the largest natural disasters in American history.
I love you, LA.
From LA-born siblings Billie Eilish and her brother, to Sabrina Carpenter's nod to old Hollywood. Winners like the singer grateful for more than just awards.
I feel so lucky to be able to come together and do something so special and beautiful and celebrate music.
The night's focus, raising money and honouring the victims of LA's fires.
We're going to dedicate this one to the city.
A standing ovation for the Los Angeles Fire Department. Among the impassioned winners, Chappell Rowan, who wrote this track before she was dropped by her label, left without health insurance, working in a donut shop. Her win, all the sweeter as she vowed then to one day say this.
Record labels need to treat their artists as valuable employees with a livable wage and health insurance and protection. Labels, we got you, but do you got us?
Shakira referencing her immigrant brothers and sisters.
You're loved, you're worth it, and I will always fight with you.
A dig at President Trump's diversity target comments coming from Alicia Keys.
DEI is not a threat, it's a gift.
It was a cultural phenomenon, Charlie XCX bringing the messiness of Brat, but no tantrums over missing out on Album of the Year, that honour going to another. Despite winning more Grammys than any other artist in history, Beyonce has never won Album of the Year.
It's been many, many years, and I hope we just keep pushing forward, opening doors.
After one of LA's darkest months, the Grammys, a reminder of how this city can sing. Katie Spencer, Sky News.
What about Taylor Swift? What's going on there? Looking at the morning's papers for you, should we? The looming threat of a trade war sparked by Donald Trump's foreign import tariffs leads the Financial Times, which says the likely effect on consumer prices could lead to a backlash from US business and his own party. The Guardian says the new tariffs have sparked fears of a global trade war and big falls on the world markets, echoing what the FT is saying. The Telegraph says the EU has told Mr Trump it won't be bullied over trade despite the threat of tariffs. But as Keir Starmer tries to rebuild our relationship with the EU, the Mail says experts fear UK businesses will also pay a high price. On those Starmer efforts, the Times says France's President Macron will tell the PM tomorrow that Brexit has clearly failed. And the Eye says a major government defence review is to warn that the UK needs to develop its own Iron Dome missile defence shield to protect from possible attacks by Russia. Deputy Leader of Reform UK, Richard Tice, is joining us this morning. It's good to see you. I felt you wince when I was talking about President Macron then.
Well, look, I mean, he would say that, wouldn't he? But the reality is that the powerhouse of the EU economy, Germany, is in its third year of recession. And this idea that we should get closer to a failing, struggling economic model is completely absurd. The US is going gangbusters, and we need to learn why that is, because they've got cheap energy, because they've got smart regulations, not over-regulation. And so I think the Prime Minister should be really focusing on that and the opportunities for a partial trade deal with a new US president that actually favours the UK. We've clearly heard it. He treats us differently from the EU.
Cool, lots to talk about there. Let's talk about economists and analysts, first of all, generally saying the impact of leaving the EU single market and customs union has had a negative effect on our economy.
Well, look, all our economies are struggling, but I've just said Germany is in the third year of recession. It's doing a lot worse than we are. Why would you want to attach yourself to a failing economic model? We know what works. It's the US. It's what works in Asia. So why don't we learn lessons from those countries and actually try and repeat that and gain from that? We used to grow at 2 to 3% a year in the 80s and 90s. Now, because of over-regulation, over-taxation and the madness of net zero, we're really struggling, as are the EU countries.
OK. 3 million fewer jobs, according to Cambridge Econometrics, 32% lower investment, 5% lower exports, 16% lower imports, £311 billion worse off by 2035 because we've left the EU.
And it's just complete nonsense. I mean, this is twaddled by Ramona institutions that just can't accept the fact that we've left. And actually, we've now got great opportunities and we should grab them and thrive them. The issue with Brexit is that the Tories utterly failed, having taken us rightly out of the EU, to take advantage of it, to do the things that they promised. Control immigration, get rid of daft EU laws, lower taxes, and that's how you grow an economy. You can't tax your way out of a crisis.
So we don't need experts, as somebody famous once said, is what you're suggesting there. Let me just quote Bloomberg to you, though. Found that Brexit is costing the UK economy £100 billion a year.
Again, I mean, this is the same Bloomberg that told us that we shouldn't leave the EU. Of course they're going to do that. But all the city... Do you remember when the city said that we were going to...
making it up, are they?
I'm afraid to say, actually, bluntly, they are.
So you're suggesting that Bloomberg are making up those
garbage.
figures?
I just come back to the simple fact.
You're saying that Cambridge Econometrics are making up those numbers?
It's garbage.
What about the Centre for Economic Performance?
It's complete garbage. What they're not focusing on is Germany. Germany is in deep recession, and we need to do as much as we can to get away from that, not drag ourselves nearer. The last thing we should be doing is tying ourselves to ever more net zero EU carbon policies that add costs to our businesses. We need to scrap net zero to get lower costs, to reduce bills, reduce the cost of living. That's what ordinary people in my constituency want us to do.
And how do you feel about an EU youth mobility scheme?
It's a terrible idea because it's just freedom of movement via the back door. We need to freeze immigration, net zero immigration, so that actually we start... Our public services cannot cope with the size of the population as it is. The last thing we need is millions more people coming to the UK would actually deteriorate our public services, our struggling health system, our overburdened housing market, and more besides.
Your views on Trump's tariffs on Canada, Mexico and China?
Look, Trump is a businessman that is always out, he's always negotiating, and he's very concerned, quite rightly, about the huge influence of mass immigration, of the drugs, of fentanyl. You know, these are serious things, and let's see where it goes. But the joy of being outside the EU is that actually I think we've got a good chance of having a much better trading relationship with the US looking at a partial trade deal, because we've got that flexibility as an independent sovereign nation, and that's a great thing.
But what about these tariffs? Do you agree with the tariffs that he's suggesting?
At the end of the day, tariffs are used as a negotiating tool.
But do you agree with them or not?
They are used as a negotiating tool.
So he's not going to do it?
No, here's the point, right? Our job, the Prime Minister's job here, and our job in challenging him is negotiate for Britain. Put Britain centre stage rather than giving all our money to overseas nations like Mauritius on the Chagos deal, on overseas climate aid, all of this nonsense. Keep our money here. Focus on improving the prosperity of British citizens.
I'm going to have to row you back to the question. You're all over the place this morning. What do you think...
I'm on good form this morning.
Well, you would say that, wouldn't you? What about the tariffs?
Look, it's a negotiation.
Good idea, bad idea.
Look,
so you think he's bluffing?
It's a negotiation. He's not bluffing at all, but it's a negotiation.
A 25% tariff?
Very often, when you start a negotiation, you don't end up, right, where you start. That's how negotiation works. The more we have smart business people coming into politics and negotiating on behalf of Britain, the better, rather than just rolling over and giving all our money away like this Prime Minister.
He says he's having a chat with him on the phone this morning, but as far as he's concerned, Canada, Mexico, China, it's a done deal.
And let's see where it ends up. It may well be a done deal.
But if it's a done deal, what's it going to do to the global economy? And what impact is it going to have on our economy?
You're clearly not interested in what's happening in the UK. I am. I'm negotiating on behalf of British citizens what's right for us.
Why do you say that? Why am I not interested?
Because you're focused on...
I've lived in this country a lot longer than you.
Really?
Yeah.
Let's focus on what's going on in Britain, not what's going on in Mexico and Canada. That's what's of real interest to us. And we've got to get this economy growing by cutting out daft regulation, stop sending our money overseas, scrap net zero, and that it gives us the space.
Are you supporting massive tariffs or not?
Look, tariffs are a negotiation. I've said that. What I'm supporting is we've got to focus on the UK. You seem to be focusing on Mexico and Canada. I'm focusing on the UK.
You missed out China, and I was then going to go on to Europe.
Yeah, you can go on all those. Let's focus on Britain, shall we? What works? What makes British citizens better off? You're not interested in that.
You haven't asked me about it. How unhappy are you about tonight's dinner?
How what?
How unhappy are you about tonight's dinner?
Prime Minister can chat and have dinner with whoever he wants, but frankly, what I'm really concerned about is that he tries to link us to the EU energy schemes. Norway's government has just collapsed over that. I'm concerned about ever higher carbon taxes, putting businesses with imposing more costs on businesses, and I'm concerned about having a closer EU sort of defence procurement relationship, again, which will not be in our interest. Our interest is getting closer to the United States. That's a growing economy that is very successful.
He's doing that as well. He's doing. Why can't he do both?
Well, let's see, shall we? But in terms of where you want to focus, where the prosperity is, it's in the US. It's not in the failing recessionary EU, is it?
They're our biggest trading partner.
No, they're not. The US is our biggest single trading partner, OK? So let's focus on what's good in the US.
The European Union, the European bloc, is our biggest trading partner.
And it's failing, right? The powerhouse of that trading bloc is in recession for the third year. You seem incapable of registering that point.
It's good to see you, as always. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Thank you. Let's have a quick look at what the markets are doing, should we, as a result of the announcements by President Trump. It's fair to say that he will be speaking to both Canada and Mexican leaders later on this morning. But that's what it's doing as a result of the announcement that China will get a 10% tariff. That's certainly what the president is hinting at. Will he follow through? We'll talk about that in more detail throughout the course of the programme. Meantime, Zach Polanski, the deputy leader of the Green Party, is here for us now. It's good to see you. Thanks for taking the time to join us. You just heard what Richard Tice was saying. Why should we not be getting closer to the US rather than to the EU?
Well, I think from that interview you just had with Reform, it revealed what Nigel Farage and his mates really want, which is to support Donald Trump and not to support Britain's interests at all. They promised us prosperity, sovereignty, freedom, but actually most people's experience has been economic decline and a sense of a country that is more divided with anti-migrant rhetoric. We just heard then it was everyone else's fault. It was net zero's fault.
He's right to say that Germany is in recession.
He is right, but actually that's... They went into recession during the pandemic and they've never really come back in the same way, largely because they rely on manufacturing.
So why do we want to tie ourselves to them?
Well, you made the point better than me, Kay, because they're the biggest trading bloc. And actually, if we're going to negotiate with Donald Trump...
Don't quote myself back.
If we want to negotiate quite seriously with the USA, It really suits Donald Trump to keep us vulnerable and fragile to his unpredictability by, isolating us. We don't want isolationism, we want influence. And the way we have influence is by closer links with the European Union, which would be something like rejoining the customs union.
Not if he sidelines the EU.
Well, so the EU is not perfect, and that's because no country is perfect. So all of these countries need to come together. But we can make so much better diplomacy working with our closest neighbours than being separate from them. So I think this is one time when we really need to speak with a stronger voice, a voice of solidarity, especially as we see growing hatred across the country and move towards a far-right anti-immigrant rhetoric. I think it's really important, again, that we have parties like the Green Party making the case that the EU is not perfect, but ultimately we are better working with our allies than against them.
But the country decided that they didn't want to be part of the European Union anymore, and we've only been out of it for 5 years.
Well, so there's been recent polling that says 1 in 5 Leave voters, so those are people who voted for Brexit, are saying that it's a success. That means 4 out of 5 people who voted for Brexit just a few years ago are now saying that was a mistake.
Yeah, but we know what the polls were saying ahead of the referendum, but they were wrong.
And polls always change, but that's a really, really clear swing to people saying, actually, we were promised all sorts of things. But when you look around towns and cities around the country, they are decimated by the fact that there's been decades of austerity. Austerity was always the problem, not the European Union. And as I say, the European Union is not perfect. But if we want to solve the problems in this country right now that are mainly caused by a cost of living crisis, we need to tackle inequality. We have multimillionaires and billionaires making more money than ever before, and ultimately we should be redistributing that money to tackle inequality.
How do you propose we should do that?
So the Green Party for a long time have proposed a wealth tax, just a 1% tax on assets of £10 million or more. They'll be raising £30 to £50 billion that we could be putting straight back into our public services. There's lots of other measures too, but we really need to have this conversation in this country that ultimately the inequality in the country is what's driving so much of the sentiment where people are unhappy and our services are broken. We've also got water companies where CEOs and shareholders are taking billions of pounds in profits while they're still pumping sewage into the water. None of this is sustainable, and we need a radical transformation of our economy.
You're worse than Richard Tuss for going off topic. I was asking you about Brexit. What do you want the Prime Minister to come back with?
I've never been compared to Richard Tice before. But, to answer your question very directly, I want the Prime Minister to come back with and I think he will do this, a more grown-up approach. And so there's lots of things that I criticise Keir Starmer for, but I'm really pleased that we are seeming to be back into conversation with the European Union, and there are some sort of adults back in the room. Now, I am worried about the talk about a bigger military bloc. That seems to be being pushed by Donald Trump as well. I think that's worrying. I think ultimately we need to be looking at diplomacy and peace rather than more arms and force.
We also need an Iron Dome, I'm reading this morning, to protect us from Russia. So maybe we do need to spend a lot of money on our defence.
Well, no, I think this is really grim. And I think whenever you've looked in history, we can look at the Cold War and lots of other instances when this kind of arms race and rhetoric races up, it never ends well. Ultimately, we need to be the voices in the room that are talking about diplomacy and peace. And I think that's a really important role we play.
It's great to see you.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. Still to come on The Breakfast Show for you here on Sky News, with the threat of huge tariffs on the horizon from Donald Trump. We'll speak to Government Minister Catherine McKinnell, MP, about what the government plans to do about it. And Kendrick Lamar makes history as this year's Grammys. We'll bring you all the highlights.
We're going to do this 100 times every day for the next 3 months.
Why have we agreed to this?
Raises many questions about many things.
Actually seeing people impacted, she was so upset.
It was powerful. They kind of couldn't believe they were being berated here.
Very much on my terms, I think was the subtext. News happens fast around Donald Trump.
It was a kind of wow moment.
Yeah, that's what it feels like, doesn't it?
It's Trump world, and we just live in it.
So, where next?
Follow Trump 100 wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm Dominic Waghorn, Sky's International Affairs Editor, covering a world that seems to be unravelling. War, unrest, revolutions.
It's not his country, it's ours.
They have succeeded for the first time in their country's history in removing a leader from power.
No freedom!
Sky News, the full story first. There was fighting here, but there's clearly now a lull, and they're using it to bring up more ammunition. This is a mass exodus in which Russia is hemorrhaging some of its brightest and its best. According to the local weather channel, there have been more than 2,500 lightning strikes and flash flooding, all on top of this week's lethal tornado. What stays with you most in this job is some of the people you meet. What is your worst fear about what the Russians want to do to the children?
They're just boosting demographics by stealing young people.
Would you like to take the opportunity, Mr. President, on Sky News to invite Barack Obama to come here? Mr. Trump, are you running for president? Can you confirm it?
We're going to take a look, a very serious look.
On that day, we saw your fighters killing women, killing children. Was that a mistake? Did you go too far? You couldn't control your fighters? The full force of the state is being used to crush any protest. Free wherever you get your news. It's half an hour now past the deadline that Hamas issued, and we've now seen a third barrage of rockets coming in.
Another alarm. The mood here is jittery and nervous.
We're seeing the world get more and more divided, and it's our job to try to make sense of it all.
I saw police being forceful, pushing young men and women to the ground as they made almost 100 arrests. Will the cold affect your voters?
Well, we have a lot of tremendous support.
Free wherever you get your news.
The people here know that worse storms may well be on their way.
I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people. Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised. If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
Hello again, everybody. The Schools Minister, Catherine McKinnell, is here with us this morning. It's good to see you. Thanks for taking the time. How are you changing the schools' accountability scheme, Ofsted?
So Ofsted's announced a consultation today on a new report card system. It's all part of a new era of school accountability and improvement to make sure that we drive those great outcomes for children wherever they are in the country and right across the country. We know that currently 1 in 3 children leave primary school without the required standards in reading, writing and maths. We know 1 in 5 children are regularly absent from school. You can't get a great education if you're not in school to get it. And we know that there are 600 schools that are persistently underperforming, and 312,000 children are in those schools not getting the school outcomes that they should. So we're determined to shine a spotlight on where schools are doing a fantastic job, but also where there's room for improvement to make sure that we get those improved outcomes for children everywhere.
A more detailed report, I believe. So how much longer will these inspectors spend at each school?
So I think the time of the inspection, that's obviously for Ofsted to determine. But what will make a difference is a more granular report of how a school's doing. The old system with single headline grades was really high stakes for schools. It was very low information for parents. And what parents are telling us is they want to know more about what their school is doing and how it's going. And we think that Ofsted obviously is consulting on this new report card, but it is a real opportunity to shine a spotlight on a much more granular range of information about a school so that we can see what's going really well and celebrate that, but also highlight where there's room for improvement and support schools with that improvement, because that's how we drive those better outcomes for children.
More detailed report obviously means that they'll have to spend longer at the school, so I'll have to ask Ofsted when they join us a little bit later on. What do you want to see come from the Prime Minister's meeting with European leaders?
I think it's really important that we continue to build strong relationships with our nearest neighbours and our big trading partners. We need to work on both reducing barriers to trade. We inherited a terrible Brexit deal from the previous government, and so we just need to improve it and work on how we break down those barriers to trade. Well, we've been very clear on our red lines that we won't rejoin the customs union, the single market, or change freedom of movement.
What about
but we can
mobility?
still improve on those trading arrangements, and also, I think, fundamentally, our national security arrangements as well, to make sure that we have a really strong partnership with our European neighbours on both defence and economic security, so we can deliver on our plan for change.
But what about youth mobility?
So currently there's no plans for a youth mobility. Well, that's obviously for...
yeah, but you're schools minister, what do you think?
Well, as a schools minister, I don't think it's for me to give a running commentary on EU negotiations. Well, I mean, there are no plans currently, and
would you support it?
That's not the government's position.
Yeah. Is it possible to please Europe and the US at the same time?
I think it's really important that we keep really strong relationships with both the EU and the US. We have a really strong trading relationship with the US as well. We have £300 billion of trade, with them £1.2 trillion invested in each other's economies. We are our strongest mutual investors, and I think it's really important that we continue to build those strong relationships. And I think that's the difference that Keir Starmer has brought to government from the chaos that we had in the past, is that actually we take a really mature approach, a relationship building approach, and really acting in the national interest to make sure that we build those strong relationships that will ultimately serve our economy, which we know is growing again, and we have falling inflation, we have wages rising finally, and we're putting the economy on a stable footing and delivering on the plan for change by working with our closest trading partners and our really close security partners too.
What about if he forces us to choose Trump?
I mean, that's hypothetical, and I can't see...
Not really, given his rhetoric over the weekend.
I can't see how we, that won't change our approach to our European neighbours and our US partners. They're all very strong partners within NATO in terms of our defence. They're very strong trading partners, and we'll continue to build those relationships in a really mature way. And I think Keir Starmer really has shown the difference, that having a Prime Minister that can work with allies and build those strong relationships can make in government. And I appreciate there is a lot of global insecurity. I understand the premise of the question, but I think if we continue to build those strong partnerships, we can really look forward to a bright trading future with our neighbours and with the US as well.
Or not, because, I mean, the rhetoric over the weekend from the President Trump is heading more and more towards trying to divide us from the European Union. Previously, your Prime Minister has said that he didn't have to choose between Europe and the US. Do you think that is going to still stand if he continues to put that wedge between us?
Well, I think the Prime Minister's taking the right approach. He's going to the European Council. He's had Chancellor Scholz here over the weekend. We have a really strong relationship. Clearly, there are many global challenges. We're still supporting Ukraine. There are many global insecurities around the world. So to build as many partnerships on a really strong footing as possible is clearly in our national interest, to build on those trading relationships, but also on our national security and defence. And obviously we'll do whatever it takes in the national interest to secure Britain's prosperous future.
OK, public services in this country aren't good enough and cost too much, not according to me, but according to the head of the National Audit Office. Is he wrong to say that?
Well, we've seen across the board the inheritance that we've had from the last government, where public services have been underinvested in. We've seen chaos on the railways. We see NHS waiting lists. In schools, there are many challenges in terms of the infrastructure. So, I mean, the first thing we did in government was, from a schools perspective, put our schools on a firmer footing, giving a pay rise to teachers. We are committed to reducing the NHS waiting lists and investing in 40,000 appointments. There was a big investment at the budget to bring those waiting lists down. And we're also investing in technology to support improvements right across our public services. That's a really big part of reform. And obviously, we're working on the railways and bringing Great British Railways back into...
How long is all this going to take?
In order to try and put our railways back on a firmer footing.
How long is it all going to take?
I mean, we're working as hard as we can. Obviously, we've got very specific commitments as part of our plan for change to really take Britain forward, because fundamentally, we're not going to get our economy to grow when we don't have public services that underpin every aspect of our public life in this country. If people can't get their appointments, they can't get to work. If people, if the schools are falling down, children can't get a great education.
He's encouraging you to take risks.
We're invested in it.
He's encouraging you to take risks. What risks are you taking with schools, hospitals and benefits to make a change?
Well, fundamentally, we had to get at the last budget, we had to put the public finances on
the budget was a risk
on a much firmer footing in order to. We had to make some difficult choices. No, it wasn't a risk because we're very confident it's the right choice.
What risks are you taking?
Well, I'm not entirely sure what risks we should take with public services. I think they're a really fundamental part of our national fabric, and I think we need to take a really solid and strategic
are not sustainable.
Solid strategic approach to our public services to make sure they can underpin our future economic growth. We're looking at investment opportunities. We've just signed a big defence deal with Rolls-Royce, £9 billion.
That's nothing to do with welfare,
support
NHS,
our
schools.
Nuclear deterrent.
Nothing to do with the things I just asked you about.
But fundamentally, if we don't have strong national security, we can't underpin our national infrastructure here at home. We need to invest in our public services. We made those decisions at the budget. They weren't all easy choices, but fundamentally we need to underpin our national budget in order to create the solid foundations to then be able to attract that inward investment that will make our economy grow. If we get the economy growing, we can invest in our public services. But we've taken the tough decisions to make the immediate change in our NHS, in our health services, in our public transport, in order to get the economy to grow, to fundamentally secure our national security going forward and our trading relationships as well with our international partners. We are an attractive place to invest, and I think we've got every reason to look forward to a bright future.
OK, good to see you. Thanks so much indeed. Thank you. So the words that we've been hearing from President Trump over the weekend, suggesting that the tariffs will be going ahead, both with Mexico and Canada at 25% and 10% in China. Well, this is the impact that it's had on the markets in the Far East. So far, as you can see, they have taken a hit. There he is from earlier. Mari, what did you make of what the Minister was saying?
So Catherine McKinnock there, she was on to talk about the Ofsted kind of revamp, let's say, and the fact that they're trying to change the system and these one-word assessments weren't working. Now, if you speak to different education experts, some of them are saying, actually, this isn't really that different from the old system, and they're quite concerned that actually it's a bit more more of the same. But she was trying to argue that actually it's going to be more detailed, more granular, and therefore more information for parents. Some would argue parents have a lot on their plate as it is. Do they need to be absolutely overwhelmed with more and more and more information that takes more and more and more time? Nonetheless, others would argue knowledge is power, and therefore the more information, the better. So it depends on where you stand on that. But that was kind of what she was there to talk about. But what was really interesting was some of the conversation around the EU and the trade and opening up or unlocking barriers to trade with the EU. Now, when you asked her about freedom of movement, when you asked her about, well, essentially a youth mobility scheme, which they argue is not the same thing, she said, we have no plans currently for a youth mobility scheme. Now, when governments say no plans, that means it's on the table. So realistically, we are trying to, as journalists, decipher what kind of concessions the government is going to make in order to get whatever they want back from the EU. And it looks like maybe a youth mobility scheme is still a possibility of something they could leverage to try and get something back from the EU. So I thought that was a really, really interesting moment there. And then when you were quizzing her on the comments from the NAO chief, the National Audit Office, and and what he'd been saying about public services not being good enough but also being too expensive. She wasn't really engaging with your questions fully, surprise, surprise, which was frustrating because actually you were trying to ask her about the fact that public services are costing a lot of money but also not delivering, so it's the worst of both worlds. And her response to that was, you know, oh, public services have been underinvested, so we just need to invest more money in them. Well, actually, the NAO chief isn't saying that. He's not saying they need more money. They're saying they need to be more adaptable and flexible and change the way we're doing things and potentially use more AI, tech, etc. And another thing, when you were asking her what kind of risks are you taking, the NAO chief is saying you've got to start taking risks to be more innovative, otherwise things are going to come kind of crashing down. Again, she suggested actually it wouldn't be a good idea to be taking risks with public services, but she's kind of missing the point of what he's arguing. But she didn't outright say he was wrong, but that's what he's calling for, and she didn't seem to agree with it.
No. And then when it came to the difference between the European Union and the US and who we should be closer to, let's see what happens. For now, thanks very much. Thank you. The boss of GB Energy has told Sky News it could take 20 years to deliver a Labour government pledge of 1,000 jobs for Aberdeen. Sir Keir Starmer also promised voters his flagship green initiative would cut energy bills by as much as £300. But in his broadcast interview, Jürgen Mayer suggested this was a very long-term project spanning decades. Conor Gillis reports from Aberdeen.
In this city, they know change is coming. Once Europe's oil capital, Aberdeen is a place pivoting, now home to GB Energy, the government's flagship green idea.
Never heard of it. Oh, yeah, no, sorry, the new government agency, yes.
I haven't heard anything about that, mate, sorry.
It's a good thing it's coming, but it's overhyped and it'll never deliver what the government said.
It's a good thing. It's better than not coming. And we are supposed to be the oil capital.
And that is why it's here. GB Energy won't supply electricity to consumers, instead owning and managing renewable energy projects. The government trying to lure investors to join in. This big pitch from Labour has been mired in confusion. There are promises to save tens of billions of pounds for households, to slash energy bills and create thousands of jobs. But there are questions here in a nervous Aberdeen about what delivery looks like.
Nice to meet you. I'm Connor from Sky News.
And with 1,000 GB Energy jobs pledged, here is the man tasked with making it happen. In this, his first TV interview.
Great British Energy itself is going to create, over the next 5 years, 200 or 300 jobs in Aberdeen. That will be the size of our team. But look, that is...
They were promised 1,000.
Look, and I said, in the very long term, as we become a major energy champion, it may be many more than that.
What's the very long term?
Well, look, we grow these companies. Energy companies grow over 10, 20 years, and we're going to be around in 20 years as a British energy champion.
So it could take 20 years to get 1,000 jobs?
Look, but the issue that you're completely missing here is the thousands of jobs that are being created in the supply chain.
Off the Aberdeen coast, a glimpse of a transition already underway as business bosses question the pace of this new project.
200,000 people in the UK are employed in the energy sector. About a quarter of those are just in this region alone. What we have got visibility of is probably not as much progress as anybody would have liked. I think we're really looking over the next few months for that to be delivered on.
If you look at how many jobs we think are going to go, particularly in the North East, you know, if GB Energy does not pick up the pace and start to, you know, move workers in there and start to create proper green jobs, then I'm afraid we could be looking at a desolation of the North East.
But these are early days. Billions of pounds of public money is being pumped in. Yet the boss cannot say when consumer energy bills will finally come down. Conor Gillis, Sky News, Aberdeen.
Still to come on The Breakfast Show for you here on Sky News. You can't hold her back. Beyonce takes home 2 Grammy Awards for Cowboy Carter.
I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
We'd been warned that we would meet people in the lowest moment of their lives.
Their story is one of fundamental American failure. Well, a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club, but I have to say there are more media here than there are supporters.
We love Trump!
I've witnessed the remarkable passion for politics here, but the anger too. This is just the audience that Joe Biden wanted.
Is this the moment to reform gun laws?
You know, it's easy to go to politics.
But it's important, it's at the heart of the issue.
For all the talk of a toned-down, humbled Trump, yes, maybe there was just a little less rhetoric, a little less divisiveness, but in the end it was the same rhythm, the same speech, the same man.
All them people that died in Russia and Ukraine, they'd still be alive today if Donald Trump was president.
If it's my wish, have a businessman that's strong like Trump, but maybe just doesn't say as much, you know?
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What we've been allowed to see over here is a humanitarian corridor. Free wherever you get your news.
A young American medical student is making remarkable things happen.
I've seen a lot of difficult things, and honestly, it breaks my heart. These children don't deserve that.
I don't think there's a single Arab I know who isn't seriously disturbed by what's going on.
And so they gathered for this wonder of nature.
I'm very excited right now.
This is an extraordinary moment beyond anything I could have expected. Sky News, get the full story first.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Hello again, everybody. Welcome back to The Breakfast Show here on Sky News. It was the Grammys last night. Apparently, it was a massive hit with a little bit of controversy. Wouldn't be if it wasn't the Grammys, would it? Caroline Frost is here with us. Hiya.
Hello.
Highlights for you?
I think Beyonce taking home Best Album. She's always been the bridesmaid at this event, even though she is a record-winning holder of 35 Grammys now, most rewarded woman in history. However, that top prize, Best Album, always eluded her. In fact, her husband, Jay-Z, a year ago said, "You're snubbing her. She's the most awarded Grammy artist in history. How come she's never won this award?" History has been corrected, but she had to cross genre to do it. She is now a country music artist, and that's what she won for Cowboy Carter.
Apparently it was rubbish.
What, the album?
Yeah.
It was not, I mean, it's not up there with her greats as far as we're concerned. And in fact, she was snubbed at the Country Music Awards, but this time around at the Grammys, and it was actually Taylor Swift, who is a previous crosser of the genre, who gave her the award. So she won Country Album and Record of the Year.
Big winner, though. 5 out of 5, Kendrick Lamar.
Well, yes, and interesting for a diss track, as they say, not words I normally come up with. Yes, his big feud with his nemesis in the music industry, Drake, has clearly paid off, and he won Single of the Year and Record of the Year as well. So, yes, and you get these pictures, don't you, where they're holding this clutch of awards. We've seen pictures like Adele in the past and Taylor Swift. It was Kendrick Lamar's turn to be that man.
Yeah. And he was supposed to be retiring, wasn't he? And then he did this track as a retaliation to Drake, and then suddenly it's given him all this success.
We hear. I mean, yes. Let's take that absolutely as read. We know that these big beefs in the music industry never do any of the artists any harm when it comes to publicity, and it's obviously served him well.
But hadn't Drake now sort of tasked his record label into looking at how much they supported Kendrick Lamar's track? And I thought that was quite interesting because I personally am not really a fan of Kendrick Lamar, but the Not Like Us song got me into his music.
Exactly. Yeah, so you are absolutely proof that their marketing strategy works a treat.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And the firefighters, what was going on there?
Well, I think this year, or the whole of award season, we've talked about this, they're having to tread this line between obviously honouring all the artists and being very celebratory of the music, the film industry, the TV industry, but this is in California where we know that it's been devastated by fires, which has meant an awful lot to more people than just the artists in the room. And so they were walking this line, they paid tribute. So Bruno Mars, Lady Gaga stood up to help front a tribute to all the firefighters and people who've lost their homes. And it was the firefighters who gave Beyonce her big award at the end of the night. I think it's recognition that, yes, we have something special here, but let's not forget some bigger picture stuff.
And there was millions raised as well, wasn't there?
Yeah, there was a big relief fund that they've created around this. I mean, I think that the optics of this have been pretty productive and positive in terms of how they've done that. They cancelled all the the big glittery glasses chinking events. They've cancelled all the after parties. Just celebrate the artists, do what we need to do, but let's keep things in perspective.
And what about Kanye West?
Oh, well,
what was going on there?
So, yes, I mean, 14 years ago, you think of all the people that are still on the stage. So he ran on stage at the VMAs to say Taylor Swift shouldn't have won, his great friend Beyonce should have been rewarded.
What's going on here?
14 years later, this is what's happening. So Kanye was nominated in the rap category. However, this has somewhat overshadowed that inclusion because he turned up with his wife, Bianca Censori, and then she was wearing a big fur coat, which she dropped to her feet, and she is wearing clothes, I should add.
Not.
She's wearing a skin-tight, see-through mesh dress.
With no knickers on.
Not much underneath. Promptly escorted out of the event. The debate is still raging whether they were escorted or whether they left of their own accord. However, what they have succeeded in doing is grabbing a lot of the headlines this morning and also raising the question of how much control is this woman having over her own life.
Well, indeed.
Liv, our producer, sorry to interrupt, Liv, our producer, was saying the headline should be fur coat, no knickers. Sorry, go on.
Well, it's your point, because he put on Instagram at the beginning of the year that she was going to wear no pants as in trousers this year, as though he was dictating what she was going to wear for the next 12 months.
The articles that are now being written are the body language between the pair of them, lip readers asking about what he's commanding her to do. I mean, words like coercion are being used, abusive relationship. We don't know what's going on inside. We do know that she's now a lot more famous than she was this time last year, but not necessarily for the right reasons. I mean, people are saying, is he radicalising this woman into some sort of Kardashian prototype? Do you remember when they were married, he used to escort her onto the red carpet, and Kim Kardashian, at one point was very demure and very accepting of that, and clearly she has outgrown, they've separated, she's raising her children, very different entity these days from 10 years ago, but he seems to have found himself another model.
Thanks for coming in. Always appreciated, really appreciate it, thank you. Still to come on The Breakfast Show for you here on Sky News. All today's top stories for you, including Keir Starmer.
Yes, on tour
He's
in
on
Brussels.
Yeah,
In Brussels.
yes, and he's going to a palace this evening for dinner, the same palace that Ted Heath signed the European agreement in 1973. Make what you will of that. We'll see you soon.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people.
Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised. If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
Morning, everybody. It's 8 o'clock. Coming up on the programme for you, Donald Trump says the UK is out of line, but holds out hope that tariffs can be avoided.
Well, no such hope and positivity for Europe, which he brands an atrocity. Keir Starmer meets leaders in Brussels later today and will be speaking to the Tories in the next few minutes.
And from the world to the red carpet, we'll bring you all the highlights from this year's Grammy Awards.
It is Monday, the 3rd of February. Boos for the US national anthem in Toronto as Donald Trump warns he'll impose tariffs on Europe next.
UK is out of line, but I'm sure that one, I think that one can be worked out. But the European Union it's an atrocity.
Markets have slumped across Asia. I'll have the latest from Beijing.
Also ahead, one dead, thousands forced to flee from floods in Australia. Could there be hope for Sir Rod Stewart and thousands of other pothole campaigners with roads that fix themselves?
Cowboy Carter. Beyonce.
And Beyonce finally wins Best Album at the Grammys. Good morning, everybody. The Asian markets have slumped this morning after Donald Trump launched what appears to be a global trade war, and the London Stock Exchange is opening right now. Reform MP Richard Tice told this programme that being outside the EU gave the UK a better chance of a good trading relationship with the US. But the government told us that we shouldn't have to choose, and the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, holds talks with European leaders in Brussels later on today. More on that in just a moment, but first, Mari has more.
This is what basketball fans in Toronto think of Donald Trump. A few hours after he announced a steep 25% tariff on goods from Canada and Mexico, nearly 20,000 of them booed the US anthem.
I would just say to our allies around the world, watch this closely. You could be next. And in the meantime, stand by your friends.
And as Keir Starmer heads to Brussels this morning, it's Europe next in the president's sights.
European Union is really out of line. UK is out of line, but I'm sure that one, I think that one can be worked out. But the European Union it's an atrocity. Prime Minister Starmer has been very nice. We've had a couple of meetings. We've had numerous phone calls. We're getting along very well. And we'll see whether or not we can balance out our budget. With the European Union, it's $350 billion deficit. So obviously something's going to take place there.
Difficult questions then about how the UK navigates the troubled waters ahead. With tariffs of 10% already announced on Chinese goods too, from clothes to smartphones, we are seeing an escalating global trade war. And Donald Trump appears to be enjoying it, saying this morning that anybody that loves and believes in the United States of America is in favour of tariffs. They should have never ended. In favour of the income tax system in 1913, the response to tariffs has been fantastic. Not so fantastic is the reaction of the markets in Asia, which have slumped on early trading. Mari Aurora, Sky News.
Well, the FTSE has just opened here in the UK and it's down by 1.25%. We'll keep a close eye on that for you. But first, our Asia correspondent Nicole Johnston is here with us. What are the markets doing where you are? Morning, afternoon where you are, of course.
Well, as we just heard in that report, the markets across Asia have definitely been shaken by this weekend tariff announced by President Trump. Everywhere you look, Japan, South Korea, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Australia, all of them down 1 to 2%. Also in Asia, the car manufacturing companies, the big Hondas, Nissan, Hyundai, Toyota, Kia, not Honda, sorry, all of those also down 5 to 7.5%. So really a great deal of concern is reverberating around Asia, even though the tariffs so far have only hit China. 10%. Now, how is China going to react? Well, they've been fairly quiet so far. They have said that there will be countermeasures. We don't know what they will be at this stage. But over the last few months, the United States and China have been engaging in this type of tit-for-tat trade, sort of leading up to a trade war anyhow. We've seen the United States blocking the export of advanced semiconductor chips to China. China, in turn, has blocked the export of certain critical minerals. So both sides have a playbook that they can turn to. Also, China has been pushing back on the allegations from President Trump that it's China who is to blame for the United States drug crisis. The chemicals that are used to make fentanyl come from companies and factories across China. Well, China's response is that the drug problem is America's problem, that it is not China's problem. So we have to wait until Wednesday to see what the markets will do in mainland China, and that's because we're still in the middle of the Chinese New Year holiday and spring break.
OK, for now, Nicole, thanks. Well, as Sir Keir Starmer heads to Brussels to speak with EU leaders, I asked the Reform UK's Deputy Chair, that's Richard Tice, if the bloc should be worried about tariffs.
The joy of being outside the EU is that actually I think we've got a good chance of having a much better trading relationship with the US, looking at a partial trade deal, because we've got that flexibility as an independent sovereign nation, and that's a great thing.
But what about these tariffs? Do you agree with the tariffs that he's suggesting?
At the end of the day, tariffs are used as a negotiating tool.
But do you agree with them or not?
They are used as a negotiating tool.
So he's not going to do it?
No, here's the point, right? Our job, the Prime Minister's job here, and our job in challenging him is negotiate for Britain. Put Britain centre stage rather than giving all our money to overseas nations like Mauritius on the Chagos deal, on overseas climate aid, all of this nonsense. Keep our money here. Focus on improving the prosperity of British citizens.
I'm going to have to row you back to the question. You're all over the place this morning. What do you think?
I'm on good form this morning.
Well, you would say that, wouldn't you? What about the tariffs?
Look, it's
Good
a negotiation.
Idea, bad idea. Look, so you think he's bluffing?
It's a negotiation. No, he's not bluffing at all, but it's a negotiation.
And what impact will it have on us? Good morning.
Absolutely, yeah, you're spot on, Kay. What impact will it have on us? That is what we really, really want to know in terms of the global ramifications of this potential, possible, looks like trade war that the US is waging on its neighbours. And I think it was really interesting, Donald Trump yesterday speaking to journalists in the evening and saying essentially the EU is guaranteed to have tariffs slapped on it, but the UK maybe not. We might be lucky enough to escape them. He said essentially there could be a deal that could be made there. We'll wait and see. So I think obviously the government will be hoping and praying that he doesn't come for us, as it were. But nonetheless,
the impact on the global economy and thus on us is...
We don't live in a vacuum. Exactly. No. It's a global economy, and therefore, if that does have knock-on impacts on Canada's economy, Mexico's economy, the EU economy, it will obviously have an impact on us too, and the US, of course. Yeah. And that's the risk that Donald Trump is taking here with some of these tariffs. But when it comes to our relationship with the EU, Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, is in Brussels today. He's having, to an extent, a bit of a historic meeting this evening with the 27 leaders of the EU nations. It's the first time he's done, British Prime Minister's done that since Brexit, since we left. So it's symbolic in some ways. And what they're arguing is really having ways of improving our relations with the EU. Now, Catherine McKinnon was on the programme earlier speaking to UK about what she believes Keir Starmer and her government can do to make things better.
We need to work on both reducing barriers to trade. We inherited a terrible Brexit deal from the previous government, and so we just need to improve it and work on how we break down those barriers to trade. Well, we've been very clear on our red lines that we won't rejoin the customs union, the single market, or change freedom of movement, but we can still improve on those trading arrangements and also, I think, fundamentally, on national security arrangements as well, to make sure that we have a really strong partnership with our European neighbours on both defence and economic security, so we can deliver on our plan for change.
So Catherine McKinnon there trying to explain Keir Starmer's mission, his ambitions for today's meetings. But I think what was interesting was she was talking about, defence and security pacts and closer connections with the EU. Now, from what we've been given from Number 10 overnight, Keir Starmer is going to be quite robust with European leaders about making sure that they continue to support Ukraine and that they continue to impose those sanctions on Russia as a kind of punishment for its invasion of Ukraine and to essentially stay steadfast in that punishment. But what's interesting is this morning, while we were on air, Ben Wallace, former Defence Secretary, has been tweeting about this, and he's basically been saying, actually, Keir Starmer hasn't got a leg to stand on when it comes to asking other countries to, spend more on defence when we ourselves as a nation have not yet decided when we are going to get to that 2.5% of GDP spend on defence. He's been tweeting about that this morning, saying how can he go and lecture Europe on defence when he refuses to increase UK defence spending? And he goes on to say other things critical of Keir Starmer. And I think that is an interesting dilemma for Keir Starmer right now, because he's not going to want to look hypocritical by the fact that he hasn't decided when we are going to get to 2.5%. He just says something vague about economic conditions. But nonetheless, he wants to try and show Donald Trump to an extent that he is listening to what Donald Trump is saying about EU and European neighbours not spending enough. And he's totally on board with that and wants to stay close to the Americans at the end of the day.
Fun fact that I was talking about just at the end of the last programme, the place where Keir Starmer is having dinner tonight is where Ted Heath signed the agreement for the UK to join the EEC back in 1972. And apparently there's a mark on the marble floor, an ink stain from where somebody threw a bottle of ink at him because they didn't want the UK to join the EEC. Let's see what happens tonight. Anything could happen. What else?
We're going to bring up speed on the other stories, including the situation in Australia. One person's been killed, thousands of others forced to flee from floods in northeastern Australia. Our Sky News Australia reporter, Lauren Forbes, is at the centre of the floods in Townsville and sent this update.
Well, the floodwaters here in Townsville have receded, but the danger is far from over. More relentless rain is on the way. Now, I'm located in one of those low-lying areas near one of the main rivers, the Ross River, that have been ordered to evacuate, causing thousands of residents to flee as of yesterday afternoon. Now, they are being warned not to return despite these floodwaters receding, and that's because it could quickly turn deadly. Now, we've already seen this disaster claiming the life of a 63-year-old woman. That's when an SES boat, an emergency boat, capsized yesterday afternoon. Now, at the moment, we have Australian Defence personnel stationed here in Townsville, ready to act if conditions worsen and take a turn for the worse. At the moment, we do have roads, our major roads, the Bruce Highway, which takes you in and out of the city, cut off. And we've even seen bridges collapse from this heavy rainfall that we've copped over the last few days.
There have been large protests in Los Angeles against the new immigration policies of the Trump administration, which include ramping up arrests of illegal immigrants and the promise of mass deportations. Hundreds of people took to the streets, waving Mexican flags and banners, and blocked sections of busy highways in the city. The sister of a head teacher who took her own life says proposed changes to Ofsted's inspection rating system are dangerous. Ruth Perry's sister says while the move from single-worded judgments to more detailed report cards makes some improvements, it introduces a series of potential new risks to teachers' well-being. Ofsted says the changes will allow them to highlight specific issues and make grading fairer. Schools Minister Catherine McKinnell says parents want to know more about the schools their children go to. And you may have to be shelling out more for your Easter eggs this year. That's because the price of cocoa is up by 143% compared to this time 12 months ago, leading to a steep increase in the cost of chocolate. It's due to extreme weather conditions over the last year across Western Africa, where much of the world's cocoa is grown.
Shimon is here to talk about potholes.
I am. There could be lights at the end of the pothole tunnel after researchers...
I like that.
Yeah, it's a new one. Researchers from Google and King's College London have...
Google,
yeah, have teamed together to create what they think could be a solution to the pothole problem throughout Britain and other parts of the world, I assume. They've created this new ingredient using artificial intelligence intelligent. Of course, this is an issue that impacts many people. Potholes are not only annoying, they're also very dangerous. We've had high-profile people such as Rod Stewart campaigning, going out on their own, trying to fix potholes in their areas. Rod Stewart had complained about not being able to drive his expensive Ferraris as a result, but also the fact that an ambulance had burst a tyre, also highlighting the impact it can have on many people. But this new solution works by trying to fill some of the cracks that are formed. So potholes are often created after wear and tear due to road use. But when water is able to seep into these cracks and freezes, it can then make these holes, these cracks even bigger, and therefore potholes are created. Now, Google and King College London scientists have clubbed together using artificial intelligence to develop an asphalt mix, which contains tiny oil-filled particles made from plant waste, which is really interesting, actually, because these microscopic spores release oil.
Glad you had to
really
say that.
Difficult word. These club together. Microscopic spores release these oil when these cracks forms, and then it heals itself. So I think what's really interesting is that the scientists behind these researchers said that he wanted to really look at the way that you and I would use our own biology to heal our bodies. And yeah, and it's the same way that a tree, if it's cut, would heal itself. And they think that by using this new science, this new technology, then these roads could potentially heal itself. And of course, it would save us and also the government an awful lot of money, because at the moment it costs around £570 million to road users, and to fix the issue would cost between 14 and 16 billion.
Wow. Here's a fun fact for you. Do you know why Rod Stewart is so good with that shovel?
No.
I'll tell you, should I?
Please do.
Before he was a global superstar, he used to be a gravedigger.
Wow.
Did you not know that?
No, so transferable skill.
There you go. There you go. He's a big fan of the show. So good morning, Sir Rod. I hope you're having a lovely morning with your fantastic family. Thank you. Still to come. All today's morning papers. Let's start with the FT, should we? The looming threat of a trade war sparked by Donald Trump's foreign import tariffs leads the Financial Times, which says the likely effect on consumer prices could lead to a backlash from US business and his own party. The Guardian says the new tariffs have sparked fears of a global trade war and big falls on the world markets. The Telegraph says the EU has told Mr. Trump it won't be bullied over trade despite the threats of tariffs. But as Keir Starmer tries to rebuild our relationship with the EU, the Mail says experts fear UK businesses will also pay a high price. What does the Shadow Paymaster General, Richard Holden, think? He's here to tell us. It's good to see you. Thanks for taking the time to join us. What do you want Keir Starmer to come back with when he returns from Europe?
Well, what I'd really like to see, I suppose, if anything was there, would be to him actually to come up with some dates for his commitment to get to 2.5% spending on defence, which is one of those big things that Labour have promised over a number of years now. But I want to see some dates on that, because I think that consequence for so many other of our relationships is really important. We've seen in the last few years both Sweden and Finland joining NATO because of that threat of Russian aggression. And what I would like to see is actually some meat on the bones of that. The former Defence Secretary Ben Wallace has been talking about that in recent days as well. It's one of his things that he's been pushing very hard. And we know that from conversations with President Trump that actually that's one of the issues that they have as well. It's been a historic American issue. I'm always feeling that they're picking up the tab for European defence. And we should be actually really leading the charge on that, like we did with defence around Ukraine, where we were sending Hellfire missiles over there while the Germans were still arguing about whether they send helmets or not.
Why didn't the Tories increase it to 2.5%?
Well, we had a plan to do that, and we had it in stages to 2.5% with years next to them. Labour have always said it's an ambition to do that, but they haven't.
They've not. They've said it's when the economy allows it.
Exactly, but they haven't ever put meat on the bones of that. And I think when we get to, I think it'd be really helpful now, especially with that spending review under consideration at the moment, for them to get there on that.
Do you see Brexit as a success?
Well, I think we could have made more of the freedoms that Brexit's given us. the Prime Minister himself talked a little bit about that, how we can use some of those freedoms to do things differently to what they do in the EU. And so I think it could be more of a success. Obviously, what I worry about, though, with Sir Keir Starmer is that some of the things that we have started to get control again, like over our fisheries policy, I worry that he'll put some of those things up for negotiation, or over freedom of movement, which we were very clear about at the election. We wouldn't have we'd be going back on that.
How did that work out for you?
Well, quite. But I worry that he will give some of those things away.
OK, but what about the impact that Brexit's had on our economy?
Well, the biggest impact that we've seen on the economy in recent weeks and months has actually been the budget.
You're talking about Brexit. I'm not talking about the budget.
No, quite. But I think we can't really disassociate all these economic factors from each other. But we're not making the most out of our deregulation, because actually Labour are putting
5 years to give it a go.
Well, we were actually growing faster than the other major economies in Europe during that period, even with the COVID pandemic. I think what we've seen since the general election is we've seen whether it's farmers or businesses, or whether it's OAPs, or whether it's actually that massive jobs tax on our economy and extra regulations hitting our economy as well. We're really being hammered across the board. A lot of that's domestic, and that's stuff we're doing to ourselves because of what the decisions that Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer have made. And, that's really hurting jobs. One of those big success stories, actually, of the last sort of 15 years or so was actually that job creation. And we saw millions more jobs created in the UK economy. That has stalled now, and we can see vacancy rates really dropping. And that's really worrying for constituents, of mine, but also right across the country.
Bloomberg found that Brexit is costing the UK economy £100 billion a year. I put that to Richard Tice in the last hour. He said they talk rubbish.
Look, I think the truth is you can use those freedoms. If we use those freedoms to our maximum advantage... Look, we've already got a free trade deal with the European Union, for example. Let's get out there into the world. We've just been properly aligning with CTPPP. That's something that we looked at when we were in government. That's now come on board with those fastest-growing Asian-Pacific Rim economies. We've got that...
I'm glad you explained that. That's a very complicated acronym.
It is, yes. The comprehensive comprehensive...
So you can't remember?
The Comprehensive Trans-Pacific Partnership.
There we go.
On prosperity. So that's what it's all about. That's basically those Pacific Rim countries which are growing very quickly. We should be part of that and making the most of those agreements that we have there. I think that's... and we can also look to the US. We've not got a free trade deal with them. Obviously, a big negotiation to take place. But if we don't start them, then we'll never get there. And I think that's...
How do you feel about his tariffs?
Well, I don't want to see the world retreating in on itself at all. I don't think tariffs are usually a good idea unless there's a very specific reason that either there's been dumping by one country and that sort of thing. What I want to see is free trade across the globe. I think there is it does worry me, but I think also we've got to be able to respond to that properly, which is to show what we're doing in for example on defence, right? Because we can't expect on one side the Americans to pick up the tab for European defence, but on the other side is to say, well, we should have total free access when you're paying for us to be looked after under your broader defence umbrella. So I think there's got to be a reasonable discussion there, and I think there is a trade-off. And I think that's what we, as Conservatives, understood. That's why we had that path to 2.5%. I just wish that the government were there as well.
How do you feel about President Trump suggesting that Canada should become the 51st state?
Well, I mean, President Trump does have...
To be fair, it puts us on a sticky wicket because it's a Commonwealth country.
He does have these sort of... I think he negotiates via megaphone sometimes as President Trump, and for him that perhaps works. For us, we perhaps do things in a slightly different.
So you don't believe him?
Different, more British way. Well, I don't think he's going to. I don't think he's going to forcibly annex Canada. No, I think the truth is that I think he wants to see. He's very clear about what he wants to do, which is to put America first. That's not to say that other countries shouldn't be close behind, but he's got a very specific vision of how he sees America.
So you don't believe him?
Well, I don't think he's going to invade Canada now. Well, let's hope not, at least, Kate.
Yeah, exactly. I've just been sent this by my producer, the UK government statement on potential US tariffs. We have a fair and balanced trading relationship which benefits both sides of the Atlantic. Do you concur with that?
I broadly do, but I think there is that question around, as I've said a couple of times, around that defence expenditure. And actually, that's not so much for the UK in some regards. It's actually perhaps slightly more for some of our European partners as well, who haven't stepped up in the way that the UK has over the last few years. And when we think about Ukraine, for example, you know, we were training people after the invasion of Crimea, while the Germans were still trying to build a new gas pipeline. So I think there's when it comes to European security, all of us have a role to play, you know, in that. And NATO is obviously the cornerstone of that as well.
Just looking at the latest poll, I know we mentioned Richard Tice a little bit earlier. Reform continue to do better than you, and they're predicted to get 118 seats at the next election.
Well, look, you don't need to tell me about,
change.
You don't need to tell me about polls, mate. But there was, you know, just to say one thing. Ahead of the last general election, you know, the Labour government, the Labour Party were predicted to have a 20-point lead. Right, that was pretty consistent across the polls. When it came down to the actual results, that was half that, and it was 10%. I'd be very, very cautious about reading anything, in particularly this far out, particularly into any individual or a small number of polls. I think we've got to, you know, Kemi's outlined that we've obviously made mistakes in government. She's looking at a proper long-term way of how we turn that around. I want to see that change occur. I think it's quite clear that she's taking a steady approach to really look at the different areas and to hold the government to account while we're doing that. It is a long way, but it is also years to the next general election. And over that time, I really hope that the British public can see the Conservative Party, what we did in office, some of the good bits, and we can highlight those and also acknowledge where we didn't go in the right direction as well. I think one of those at the moment is around education. We're seeing a big speech today by Bridget Phillipson on that. I think that broadly in education policy, we saw England surge up international league tables around things like reading, around maths, around science, and educational outcomes, particularly for the poorest kids. We did stuff in the right direction there. I don't want to see that good work undone. It's a similar place where I see the economy. We did some good stuff there. I don't want to see that undone by the Labour Party, and we should hold them to account on that every day of the week.
We didn't surge on the rugby field at the weekend, did we?
No, we did not. No, or on the cricket.
We'll leave that there, should we? It's good to see you as always. Thank you. Still to come on The Breakfast Show for you here on Sky News, why so many young people appear to be turned off by mainstream politics. That's our debate. Kendrick Lamar makes history at this year's Grammys. We'll bring you all the highlights.
I'm Dominic Waghorn, Sky's International Affairs Editor, covering a world that seems to be unravelling. War, unrest, revolutions.
It's not his country, it's ours.
They have succeeded for the first time in their country's history in removing a leader from power. No freedom! Sky News, the full story first. There was fighting here, but there's clearly now a lull, and they're using it to bring up more ammunition. This is a mass exodus in which Russia is hemorrhaging some of its brightest and its best. According to the local weather channel, there have been more than 2,500 lightning strikes and flash flooding, all on top of this week's lethal tornado. What stays with you most in this job is some of the people you meet. What is your worst fear about what the Russians want to do to the children?
They're just boosting demographics by stealing young people.
Would you like to take the opportunity, Mr. President, on Sky News to invite Barack Obama to come here? Mr. Trump, are you running for president? Can you confirm it?
We're going to take a look, a very serious look.
On that day, we saw your fighters killing women, killing children. Was that a mistake? Did you go too far? You couldn't control your fighters? The full force of the state is being used to crush any protest. Free wherever you get your news. It's half an hour now past the deadline that Hamas issued, and we've now seen a third barrage of rockets coming in. Another alarm. The mood here is jittery and nervous. We're seeing the world get more and more divided, and it's our job to try to make sense of it all.
Mandatory evacuation, you must leave.
For many people, Harvey is far from over.
People here believe the water will be this deep for weeks.
I'm Greg Milam, and I'm Sky's chief North of England correspondent.
Are you trying to run me over, Sir Philip?
No, go away.
Look like it, sir. Will you respond to those who made accusations, Sir Philip?
Can you go away?
Sky News, the full story first.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Hello again, everybody. Welcome back to The Breakfast Show here on Sky News Monday morning. Look who's here on his own. I know. We'll talk to you in a second. Before that, though, he's not got much to say, has he, this morning?
It wasn't a question. You ask a question, I'll respond. Isn't that how it normally works?
Yeah, can you stop now? Thank you.
We'll get to that in a moment.
Yes.
First, there, top stories for you this morning. Global stock markets have slumped this morning after Donald Trump launched what appeared to be a global trade war. The US president has already announced levies on Mexico, Canada and China, warning he'll impose tariffs on the European Union too. In the last few minutes, the UK government has issued a statement on potential US tariffs, saying we have a fair and balanced trading relationship which benefits both sides of the Atlantic. Keir Starmer is in Brussels today to attend a meeting of all 27 EU leaders. It's the first time a Prime Minister has joined the talks since Brexit. One person has died. Thousands have been forced to flee their homes in the Australian state of Queensland due to severe flooding. Heavy rain and strong winds are forecast to last until the early part of this week. And Beyonce has won the prestigious Album of the Year award for the first time at the Grammys, despite being nominated on 4 previous occasions. The American singer was handed the award by emergency services, who'd helped with the recent California wildfires. Other winners included Kendrick Lamar, Chappell Roan and Sabrina Carpenter.
Prime Minister's jetting off to Brussels today. It's in the podcast.
Of course it is. Look, I think that Donald Trump's comment overnight put real focus on what Keir Starmer's doing today. Keir Starmer's got a pretty unique foreign policy. He wants to get closer to the US, he wants to get closer to China, and he wants to get closer to Europe. But those 3 blocs aren't entirely compatible and comfortable with each other. In particular, Donald Trump, less keen on Europe, called them atrocious overnight, and not very keen on China, slapped tariffs on them on Saturday night. So the question is, can Keir Starmer get closer to Brussels, take the UK closer to the EU, and not have retaliation from Donald Trump? And that's really the sort of essay question that's at the heart of his trip to Brussels.
What's the answer?
The answer is, I think, possibly not. I think it's going to be very, very hard. I think he might be able to get away with cozying up in 2 directions, but all 3 directions once you bring China into the equation, given US Congress's view of the role of China in global affairs, as well as Donald Trump's, makes it very difficult. And in that unnerving way he did, Donald Trump put his finger on the trickiest issue. Now, one of the things that Donald Trump is really cross with Europe about is that they can't export agriculture, food and agriculture goods to the EU. So they've got different sets of standards. Typically, US food is a bit cheaper, but they have different, and critics would say, lower standards there. So the EU don't want their stuff, their food and agriculture in the country. And what Keir Starmer's going to do, it looks like, is move UK standards back closer to the EU standards, making it even harder for the US to do business with us too. So that's going to be one of the areas of tension, I think, at the heart of this, forcing Keir Starmer to choose. Keir Starmer has always said, I don't want to have to pick between our allies, but this kind of stuff from Donald Trump makes that really hard.
We had Richard Tice on the programme earlier on today, apart from telling me that I was talking rubbish and I didn't know what I was talking about. He also talked about the fact that Germany... he also talked about... Although I said that to him as well. You should watch it back, it's quite fun. Germany has been in recession for 3 years. And so we should distance ourselves from the European Union and move further towards America because their economy is in much better shape.
There are lots of different arguments about what you should do. Look, what do you do if you're the UK and you hear what Donald Trump's saying about Greenland, which is part of Denmark, which is one of your close EU allied countries? Or whichever way you look at this, there are going to be voices telling the UK government what to do. I see the Express this morning is also saying, get closer to America. 60 billion of goods goes from the UK to the US every year. You don't want tariffs slapped on those. It's a no-brainer. But then again, the EU, in terms of all the countries, all the 27, are on our doorstep, and we do an awful lot of trade with them. Doesn't it make more sense to strengthen trading ties and military ties in the wake of Ukraine? And it's Ukraine that's also going to be a big theme of today. The UK played a big role helping Ukraine stand up to President Putin, and the EU countries know that and acknowledge that and want a bit more help from the UK in a way that perhaps immediately after Brexit, they were just a bit more nervous about the UK in all different dimensions. Now we can be seen as an ally and a help. Maybe that can help strengthen relations
And
as well.
Bridget Phillipson, I was expecting her this morning. She sent one of her deputies because she's got a big speech.
Oh dear. That's weird, because Bridget Phillipson, very much the person in the eye, she's got a bit of fighting back to do. She's done changes that I couldn't find in the manifesto to academy schools, which some say water down their freedoms, make them have to obey the same rules as other schools. So she gave an interview in The Times this morning, in which she basically had to tell readers of The Times that she wasn't a Marxist. I'm surprised she didn't want to come on the telly and explain herself in slightly more in detail with you. Look, I think there's a little bit of grumbling in Downing Street about some of the things that have emanated from the education department since Bridget Phillipson took up the mantle there, that things that Number 10 weren't entirely expecting. So today is a day where Bridget Phillipson wants to, or seemed to want to, get on the front foot and put her case as to why things like the new changes to Ofsted ratings in England, which are being announced today, are the right thing to do. Don't drive down standards, actually support them, and why she's the right person for the job.
Who did you do the podcast with?
This morning it was Anne McElvoy from Politico. She's the executive editor, so she was there on the other end of the Zoom screen.
And it's going from strength to strength, I see from your listening figures overnight. It's good to see you as always. Thank you. You can scan the QR code on the screen to get the latest edition of Politics at Jack and Sam's, the podcast with all the insider info from the world of Westminster. As you know, Jack has now moved to Washington, so one of his team, Anne McElvoy, was taking part in that Zoom this morning. And also remember that it's Monday to Thursday, 20 minutes, everything you could possibly need to know, packed into that 20 minutes. Now, the kids are alt-right. See what we did there? That's the conclusion you could draw from recent polling suggesting almost half of Gen Zers would welcome a strong leader who doesn't have to bother with elections. You've got two young men who are going to talk it through with us. Luca Watson, political commentator with Young Voices, and Jonathan Gibson, who does the same thing. It's good to see you both. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Jonathan, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite shocking to see the way that study is framed and the results right there in front of you. But I think we've seen for a long time growing disillusionment with traditional political parties. I think they feel like young people aren't communicating effectively with them. Maybe the issues that they care about are very much being neglected and swept under the radar. And I think this is somewhat a backlash and a response to this phenomenon which has taken place with people using social media and possibly voices very much outside the establishment or what would be seen as politically mainstream or acceptable to bring in young people into the fold. It's something that I've seen on YouTube algorithms and personally experienced. And every young person would have also had similar things happening to them.
Luca?
Well, I think, in a sense, it's a rational response to a system which now, for people our age, seems to have not just not worked in our interests, but actively hostile to our interests. It seems to be making our life harder. And so I think it's a rational response if a system is consistently working against you to wish to do away with the system as a whole. Now, obviously, that's quite worrying if you think that democracy is the best system of all and that the dictatorship obviously has its downsides.
Do you think?
Yeah, to put it mildly. But another thing is, for people of our age, we don't remember when close peers like maybe Spain, Portugal, Greece, all of Eastern Europe were under dictatorships. All we've known is the current system, and so we don't have that easy comparison. For us, dictatorships are something exotic, like in North Korea. So I think it's difficult to really imagine what a Britain under a dictatorship would be like, which means that perhaps some people are more inclined to support that sort of thing.
What about places like Russia?
Well, I don't think Russia's quite a dictatorship yet. Well, it's sort of mixed. But even Russia, I think, is seen as too far away, too exotic. And I think what people want
No
is
one
not...
can win except Putin.
Yeah, well, I mean, Putin would dispute that. But...
If you dispute it with him, then you tend to end up dead.
But what I will say is I think what people want more so than a dictatorship is strong leadership. And that was what this poll hinted at more so, I think, was that there's a sense that successive leaders in this country have not asserted their will. They've been scared to take big decisions. They've been scared to really take big political risks and force reform on the system. And we have a political system which allows for that. The Prime Minister has an awful lot of power, especially as Keir Starmer does with a huge majority, to really bring about major reforms. It's just that we don't have leaders who have that self-belief, that self-confidence, that vision to do so.
Jonathan?
Yeah, I think it's very easy and very common that young people say, why should I vote? They're both the same. None of them really care about me. None of them are talking the same language as me. So, what difference does it make? And so if you have a system in which there feels to be like a castleization of the two main political parties and you don't have anywhere you can really place your vote, I think that causes big problems. And I don't think it's that young people don't care, because you see increasingly young people getting involved in protest movements or other ways of expressing political sentiment. But through voting, we've seen lower and lower turnout, and we've seen actually them moving increasingly to the fringes. So I think that it's more complex, and obviously we can't also homogenise all young people. People have very different reasons, and different demographics of young people have different reasons. But if they feel like whichever party I vote for, none of them are really going to care about housing or my standard of living or how difficult it is to get onto the job market or things like that.
Does it depend which forum you're voting in, though? I mean, we had a referendum quite recently that made quite a big difference to this country.
Yeah, and I think that was really interesting because people, maybe for the first time, felt like they had a voice in kind of very much of being involved in politics. But I'm not sure how much what the turnout for young people was like there. Maybe there were certain pockets of young people that voted that hadn't, but still, I've got friends who are teachers and they're going to schools and giving presentations, and like 3 children can recognise a picture of the Prime Minister or something like that. There's very little political education and political involvement, and maybe unlike my grandparents who grew up in a time where politics was everything and it was being framed in the context of a war, people just feel very much removed from anything political. And even though it does have big impacts on our lives, you don't necessarily see that or feel that in quite like a free market system.
Jeremy Corbyn or Nigel Farage?
Well, I think Corbyn had a bit of a youth quake, as it was known at the time, and he definitely inspired some young people. I think what Corbyn did was he appealed directly to young people, and he had policies which were catered towards our generation on things like student loans. He promised a lot of things to a lot of people, but he was one of the few politicians who seemed intent on actually having a vision for young people where the country would be better.
I'm not sure he'd done the maths, though.
I don't think he did do the maths, and as I said, he promised a lot of things to basically everyone. So it wasn't that he specifically geared towards young people. I think Nigel Farage as well, he has an appeal with his use of social media, for example. He seems more authentic, less scripted than most politicians, which is something that people of our generation tend to prefer, especially because the medium we're used to is different. We're not used to watching traditional broadcast media. We're more likely to use...
Just appearing on it.
Just appearing on it, that's all we do now. But we're more likely to listen to, for example, long-form podcasts. And we saw this in the US election with Trump, where he'd be able to go on for sort of 3-hour-long interviews and speak. At that point, you have to speak authentically. You can't have pre-prepared answers for 3 hours. And that's something that Farage seems more capable of doing, whereas other politicians like Keir Starmer, I imagine, would struggle to speak for 3 hours with authenticity about his own life, about his ideas, in a way that Farage seems more natural.
So it's about personality politics, that's what makes the difference?
I think personality is increasingly coming to the fore with the age of social media, and that's how young people are increasingly consuming their news. I do wonder if there'll be somewhat a left-wing equivalent maybe of Joe Rogan you could sort of see coming into the forefront and attracting a lot of young people, because I completely agree with Luca that these sorts of other forms of maybe less traditional media are increasingly being consumed. Sorry?
Alistair Campbell?
Exactly. I mean, that's had remarkable sellout, and people thought, oh, the centrism, the centre ground and is never going to sell out stadiums. And look what it's done. It's been a form of directly bringing conversation to people's houses, to people's homes, to people's ears, in quite a different way to what we're used to. So whether that happened through increasing use of social media or different strategies from mainstream political parties, and I think they will have to strongly consider this as we're seeing growing voter apathy from young people and actually disdain towards them. I think that's going to be something that's going to be interesting.
So if we were under a dictatorship, who would you like to dictate to us?
How about me? Can I choose that? I wouldn't want a dictatorship, obviously, that's the first thing to say. And I don't think there are any current politicians who would succeed, I think, as dictators. I don't think any of them have a sufficient vision. There are examples of maybe not dictatorship, but strong leaders who have been able to transform their countries for the better. But the common theme is that they had a significant vision, they knew what they wanted to achieve, and they ultimately put their interests of their country first. The obvious issue with dictatorship is obvious. A lot of the time, the leaders end up putting their own interests and their family's interests first, and that's when things start to go...
Absolutely.
Quite, and that's when things start to go a bit pear-shaped. But I don't think anyone in this country is trying to become a dictator, I hope. I don't think any of them would succeed either. But I do think that what we need is a prime minister or a leader who is a bit stronger, who is willing to make difficult decisions, who's willing to upset voters, including their own voters, to make the difficult decisions that need to be made, which is something that at the moment no one seems willing to do.
Was it Churchill who said that democracy is the worst form of government except all the others?
Yeah, and this is something maybe that has sometimes been glorified as a perfect system in which everyone's going to be happy. And it simply can never be the case because you're always going to have people in a democratic system that are not represented. If you look at the flip side with authoritarianism, it forces intense cooptation, uses intense violence, and we can look throughout history to see and compare regimes which are more authoritarian and more democratic. And this study is concerning at a time where there's been a significant backsliding within democracies, and we do see it across Europe. So maybe I'm less reassured that the UK is in no way going to go in that direction. I think there very much could be a possibility, but I think the way this is not necessarily some scenario that young people suddenly all hate democracy. And I think there's actually other studies which suggest they're more favourable. But what it is a warning sign that young people aren't being brought into the current political fold and need to be listened to.
That's true. Final thought.
Yeah, I think if politicians are worried about this, then they need to look after our interests. They need to actually start materially delivering on key issues for people of our generation, issues like housing especially. Taxes are very high on working people and it makes it difficult to save money for housing and that sort of thing. And also basic things like crime and law and order. For people our age, often our only interaction with the state is when our bike gets stolen or our phone gets snatched or something like that. We call the police and they just give us a crime reference number and say, oh, bad luck, and we might get in contact. I don't think that's enough. We need actually to have policies that deliver for us and give us a reason to buy into the system.
Newsflash, that's what we all want. Good to see you both. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Still to come on The Breakfast Show for you here on Sky News. Sounding the alarm on tinnitus, one charity's mission to raise awareness of inadequate care and long treatment times. Stay tuned for more on that.
I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
We'd been warned that we would meet people in the lowest moment of their lives.
Their story is one of fundamental American failure. Well, a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club, but I have to say there are more media here than there are supporters.
We love Trump!
I've witnessed a remarkable passion for politics here, but the anger too. This is just the audience that Joe Biden wanted.
Is this the moment to reform gun laws?
It's easy to go to politics.
But it's important. It's at the heart of the issue.
For all the talk of a toned-down, humbled Trump, yes, maybe there was just a little less rhetoric, a little less divisiveness, but in the end it was the same rhythm, the same speech, the same man.
All them people that died in Russia and Ukraine, they'd still be alive today if Donald Trump was the president.
If it was my wish, have a businessman that's strong like Trump, but maybe just doesn't say as much,
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What we've been allowed to see over here is a humanitarian corridor. Free wherever you get your news.
A young American medical student is making remarkable things happen.
I've seen a lot of difficult things, and honestly, it breaks my heart. These children don't deserve that.
I don't think there's a single Arab I know who isn't seriously disturbed by what's going on.
And so they gathered for this wonder of nature.
I'm very excited right now.
This is an extraordinary moment beyond anything I could have expected. Sky News, get the full story first.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Mandatory evacuation, you must leave!
For many people, Harvey is far from over.
People here believe the water will be this deep for weeks.
I'm Greg Milam, and I'm Sky's chief North of England correspondent.
Are you trying to run me over, Sir Philip?
No, go away.
Look like it, sir. Will you respond to those who made accusations, Sir Philip?
Can you go away?
Sky News, the full story first.
Hello again, everybody. Welcome back to The Breakfast Show here on Sky News. Keir Starmer is in Europe today. What's he doing there? Well, he's going to be having dinner with some EU leaders to discuss what? Well, could they be talking about trade? Could they be talking about youth mobility? Certainly the opposition and Reform are not at all happy about some discussions that could be going on. We'll be talking about it throughout the day, of course, here on Sky News. Before that, though, I want to talk about tinnitus. It's something that's expected to affect 8 million people in the UK by the end of the year. But how much do we know about it? Let's talk about it in more detail, should we? Trey Lowe is with us. It's good to see you.
Okay, how's it going?
Thanks. Very well. Thank you for asking. Tell me about tinnitus and how it affects you.
So, tinnitus is one of those conditions that is so debilitating, but you can't necessarily see it on someone. You can't, it's something that can't be seen, can't be observed, but the impact it has on you is absolutely excruciating. I know for me, for many years, I was just dealing with, the anxiety of it, the impact on it, people not seeing it. It's one of the toughest conditions. There's not enough support around of it.
So what's it like?
So mine is a sea of noise.
All the time?
All the time. I can literally be on the M25, I can hear it very clearly. It doesn't bother me now. I sleep like a baby. But for a long time, it was so hard to deal with, hard to sleep, hard to manage. The impact on mental health was enormous for me.
OK. Were you born with it?
No. So mine started when I was 15. I was in hospital having an appendectomy. I was given a drug called Stematol, which caused what they call an ocular gyrate crisis. Basically, eyes roll back in your head. But suffice to say, I was paralysed. I came out of it, and I had this noise in my head. And I said to my parents, Mum, Dad, can't you hear that noise? And it was weird, because I thought everyone could hear it. But I was the only person that could hear it, and that's how it started. And because for years and years I didn't realise the impact that loud noise was having on it, I was a DJ, musician, partying, a typical young person, and it just got worse and worse and worse, And when it was finally diagnosed, the impact of NHS and doctors was pretty horrific, because all they said to me was, oh, well, you've got to live with it. And that is a thing that sent a lot of people into this spiral of despair, like, you've got to live with it. Because we just think there's a pill and a cure for everything, and suddenly you're being told to live with something. You're thinking, how can I live with this fire alarm in my head? And for me, on top of it, I can't DJ and I can't be a musician, the rest of it. It was horrendous.
Can it be managed?
Yes. I mean, there are tons of different ways to manage it. The way I managed it was through things like having fans on, white noise, that sort of stuff, because the trick is to sort of mask it a little bit so you can still hear it, but you don't overly focus on it. Because what tinnitus relies on is the attention. It's an attention condition. If you give it attention and you catastrophize what it means, oh my God, I'm going to go deaf, it's going to drive me mad, that's what makes it worse. So the good thing is to start to mask it so you're not overly thinking about it. And eventually, what happens is you habituate to it, which is a technical term for just getting used to it. It's a bit like now, we're by the river, or imagine you were by a waterfall. You'd get to the point it's just the sound of a waterfall. I don't want to have to say, Kate, can you hear the waterfall? You'd be like, OK, yeah. That's what tinnitus is. It can recede into the background if you allow it to. But if you kind of keep it sort of like I call it the amygdala hijack, where it's a fight or flight, and that's continuously being triggered by it, that's where the suffering comes from. I would say it comes from the meaning you give it rather than the noise itself.
It has impacted your mental health previously, hasn't it?
It has done, yeah. I mean, I was just saying to the guys there at the back, for many years, how I coped with it was thinking, if it gets bad, I can always jump off a building. And I know that sounds horrendous, but in a weird way, it kind of allowed me to get control over it. because that was the only ultimate control, which is why I understand the whole argument around dignitas, etc., because it gives you a degree of control. But it's only when I had such bad experience with NHS that I decided to pretty much become like a neurologist, an ENT specialist. I learned for myself what it was so that I could cope with it myself without having to rely on professionals. And that's what gave me the control. And to be honest, and it sounds crazy, it's probably the best thing that could ever happen to me. Because when you suffer, it forces you to be strong. So for me, it's great, but there are millions of people who are not where I am, millions of people who don't have the strength that I have, who are still suffering with it every day. And that's why we're really calling for urgent change with NHS, where the waiting list to see ENTs is not so long, where, you know, primary care professionals don't say to people, oh, well, live with it, where there's a real understanding, you know, people get that it's a mental health condition and people are treated with the compassion that they deserve, and they're given the treatment options right from the get-go rather than waiting for years for the impact to get worse and worse and worse.
OK, and it's Tinnitus Awareness Week, of course, isn't it? It's great to see you, Troy.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for sharing your experience with us.
Thank you.
We appreciate it. Thank you. Now, the Grammys music's most prestigious night has taken place in Los Angeles. Guess who won?
Cowboy Carter. Beyonce.
Beyonce was the night's big winner, finally taking home the Grammy for Best Album after being nominated a previous 4 times. She was handed the award by emergency crews who helped tackle the deadly California wildfires. Debbie's with us. How was it?
Oh, like, I just love Beyonce. You know, this is a long time coming.
Pretty rubbish album, though.
No. Oh, Kay, don't say that. You're going to break my heart. Like, 16 Carriages. Honestly, perfect. But like, that's what I mean. It's a long time coming for her. It's the first black woman ever to win Country Album of the Year. She's the first person of colour to win Album of the Year since 1999. And the last person was Lauryn Hill. So it's a real special day. And she's also bringing up her tally as well. She's now got 35 wins at the Grammys, the most awarded artist of all time. What can you say about Beyonce? She's just perfect in my eyes. And can you tell I went to see her in Tottenham recently?
We'll talk about it more in the next hour. It's not a good album. We'll see you soon.
I saw police being forceful, pushing young men and women to the ground as they made almost 100 arrests. Will the cold affect your voters?
Well, we have a lot of tremendous support.
Free, wherever you get your news. The people here know that worse storms may well be on their way. I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles.
Morning, everybody. It's 9 o'clock. Coming up on the programme for you, Donald Trump says the UK is out of line, but holds out hope that tariffs can be avoided.
The government here say they're working closely with the White House and they don't have to choose between Europe and America.
And from the world stage to the red carpet, we'll bring you all the highlights from this year's Grammy Awards.
And who should have won and who shouldn't have won. We don't agree. It's Monday, the 3rd of February. Boos for the US national anthem in Toronto as Donald Trump warns he'll impose tariffs on Europe next.
UK is out of line, but I'm sure that one, I think that one can be worked out. But the European Union it's an atrocity.
Also ahead, 1 dead, thousands forced to flee from floods in Australia. Could there be hope for Sir Rod Stewart and thousands of other pothole campaigners with roads that fix themselves?
Cowboy Carter. Beyonce.
And Beyonce finally wins Best Album at the Grammys. Good morning. The Asian markets have slumped this morning after Donald Trump launched what appears to be a global trade war. And the London Stock Exchange is also down on early trading. Reform MP Richard Tice told this programme that being outside the EU gave the UK a better chance of a good trading relationship with the US. But the government told us that we shouldn't have to choose as the Prime Minister holds talks with European leaders in Brussels today. More on that in a moment, but first let's take a listen to what President Trump had to say.
European Union is really out of line. UK is out of line, but I'm sure that one, I think that one can be worked out. But the European Union it's an atrocity. Prime Minister Starmer has been very nice. We've had a couple of meetings. We've had numerous phone calls. We're getting along very well. And we'll see whether or not we can balance out our budget. With the European Union, it's $350 billion deficit. So obviously something's going to take place there.
Well, in the last hour, the UK government has released a statement on potential tariffs, saying the US is an indispensable ally and one of our closest trading partners, and we have a fair and balanced trading relationship which benefits both sides of the Atlantic. Well, the FTSE opened an hour ago and is down by 1.25%. It's bounced back just a little bit. We'll keep a close eye on that for you. Our economics and data editor, Ed Conway, has been across the movements in the markets this morning, and he's with us now. Hi, Ed.
Hi, Kay. It's a roller coaster, isn't it? And I think if you remember what happened last time around, the period of Donald Trump's first presidency, that was a bit of a roller coaster as well. Everyone, markets, investors, politicians, looking each day to see what he would do, and then the reaction happening. This time, it's clear that it's going to be the same. And I think a lot of people, Kay, were listening to what Donald Trump said about tariffs. It said it was his favourite word in the English language ahead of the election. And now they kind of wondered at the time, is he actually serious? Is he going to impose these tariffs? Well, now it looks like he is indeed serious. And so now you're seeing the market reaction. But as I say, we have to wait and see what happens in the coming hours and days as to whether this stuff gets imposed. If it does get imposed, it's going to be a very big deal indeed.
If you were a betting man, what would you say?
I don't bet, Kay. I don't bet. But partly because who knows? I mean, to be honest with you, like a lot of people, I wondered, this is such a consequential thing. This is the world's biggest economy. It is basically a kind of free trade area throughout most of North America. If you're imposing tariffs, particularly big tariffs, and 25% is a big tariff, what that does is it means that all of these supply chains, whether it's making cars, whether it's getting oil from Canada and turning it into gasoline in America, all of these things have been able to flow basically freely for decades. If suddenly you're saying there has to be a tariff on basically everything, that's enormous. I mean, we here in the UK, so we have a recent memory of Brexit. OK, but think about the difference here. So Brexit was something that the UK voted for. Then we had years of negotiation. Then you had the agreement between the UK and the EU, which meant there are no tariffs. So at no point were there actually tariffs between the UK and the rest of the EU. In this case, if it does go ahead, and it's, in the next, potentially tomorrow, then you're talking about tariffs instantly, overnight, in a way that we never had, in a far bigger economic area. So it's of enormous, enormous consequence. And I think everyone, there's been market reaction this morning, which has obviously been negative. I think even looking at that market reaction, down by about 1.5% here in Europe, I think a lot of people are thinking, well, it's not necessarily going to go ahead, because if this stuff does go ahead, and if it impacts not just for a few days, but for years, you're talking about big, big economic consequences for America, for Canada, for Mexico, for China, and for the rest of the world as well.
Yeah, Richard Tice, Deputy Leader of Reform, says that it is a negotiating tool.
Yeah, and he also said, the UK is in a slightly better position because it's outside of the EU. And I mean, actually, that's true, because we are not affected by the tariffs that Donald Trump imposes on Europe. There's a separate negotiation that happens with the UK. And it's quite possible that the UK has a better hand in that, partly, frankly, because if you're looking around the world, so the thing that Donald Trump dislikes is he dislikes when you are reliant. So the fact that the US is reliant on other countries to import all goods from those other countries, particularly China, and also you've got these other places like Canada and Mexico. He doesn't like that. He doesn't like deficits, as economists call them. If ever there were one country in the world that has a bigger deficit than America as a percent of GDP, it's here. It's the UK. So in a sense, we kind of come from a position of, I don't know if you call it strength or weakness, but in as much as we're one of the few countries in the world which actually imports more or less just as much from the US as we send to there, then that negotiation is potentially coming from a position of slightly more strength. But as you say, how much of this is just about negotiation? How much of this is about, imposing these tariffs for a long time? I think, frankly, still people are trying to work that out. It's definitely, this is something that he likes to use as leverage. We know that. But there are many other implications to putting tariffs in. And one of them is to say, listen, we're putting up these walls around our economy, and over time, we want to become more self-sufficient. If that's the argument, then you need the tariffs in place for a long, long time, and you're talking about much more economic adjustment and basically, in the short run, damage. So this is massively consequential. This is one of those areas where, you can't really overstate how big of a deal it could well be. And just looking at markets, it's going to be bumpy. It's going to be bumpy for a while as we try and work out what's happening here.
OK, for now, thanks very much indeed. Ed, I know you're going to keep an eye on those markets throughout the course of the day. This is what Richard Tice said earlier.
The joy of being outside the EU is that actually I think we've got a good chance of having a much better trading relationship with the US, looking at a partial trade deal, because we've got that flexibility as an independent sovereign nation, and that's a great thing.
But what about these tariffs? Do you agree with the tariffs that he's suggesting?
At the end of the day, tariffs are used as a negotiating tool.
But do you agree with them or not?
They are used as a negotiating tool.
So he's not going to do it?
No, here's the point, right? Our job, the Prime Minister's job here, and our job in challenging him is negotiate for Britain. Put Britain centre stage rather than giving all our money to overseas nations like Mauritius on the Chagos deal, on overseas climate aid, all of this nonsense. Keep our money here. Focus on improving the prosperity of British citizens.
I'm going to have to row you back to the question. You're all over the place this morning. What do you think...
I'm on good form this morning.
Well, you would say that, wouldn't you? What about the tariffs?
Look, it's a negotiation.
Good idea, bad idea. Look, so you think he's bluffing?
It's a negotiation. No, he's not bluffing at all, but it's a negotiation.
What's going to happen?
Well, I think everybody is kind of waiting and watching with bated breath to see, as you were asking Richard Tice, how much is a bluff and how much is reality when it comes to tariffs on the UK. And I think, Richard Tice was relatively confident that actually we would not have tariffs kind of whacked on us in the way that the EU has. What he was arguing was we need to distance ourselves from the EU, what he sees as, kind of a negative, a slow growth economy, and focus on the future, focus on America and trying to be more like America. So he's wanting to talk about policies like deregulation, reducing tax, those kind of classic reform policies that we would expect from him. But it's quite interesting when you had on the Education Minister, Catherine McKinnell, and also Richard Holden from the Conservative Party, to see their take on things. Catherine McKinnell was trying to be very diplomatic because obviously they're in government, they don't want to outwardly criticise Donald Trump. But what was interesting about the Tories and Richard Holden was he did say he didn't want to see the world turning in on itself in terms of that kind of protectionist look. So I think we can listen to both of those two ministers and shadow ministers and see the difference in their rhetoric.
We need to work on both reducing barriers to trade. We inherited a terrible Brexit deal from the previous government, and so we just need to improve it and work on how we break down those barriers to trade. Well, we've been very clear on our red lines that we won't rejoin the customs union, the single market, or change freedom of movement.
What about
but we can
mobility?
still improve on those trading arrangements, and also, I think, fundamentally, on national security arrangements as well, to make sure that we have a really strong partnership with our European neighbours on both defence and economic security, so we can deliver on our plan for change.
I don't want to see the world retreating in on itself at all. I don't think tariffs are usually a good idea unless there's a very specific reason, either there's been dumping by one country and that sort of thing. What I want to see is free trade across the globe. I think there is it does worry me, but I think also we've got to be able to respond to that properly, which is to show what we're doing in for example on defence, right? Because we can't expect on one side the Americans to pick up the tab for European defence, but on the other side is to say, well, we should have total free access when you're paying for us to be looked after under your broader defence umbrella.
So you see those two different figures, Labour and Conservative, talking about the possibility of Trump tariffs, and then also bringing that back to our relationship with the EU. And that's really interesting because we know the PM's in Brussels today. He's talking about having this closer relationship with Europe, but he's saying, nonetheless, there are those red lines. Catherine McKinnell was talking about those red lines as well. And I think the Conservatives and Reform are concerned around a youth mobility scheme because they both feel that it's kind of freedom of movement by the back door. They're concerned about a fishing deal. But at the end of the day, if you are going to go into negotiations with the EU on changing the deal that we have, you are going to have to make concessions if they are going to give you anything. That is the nature of a negotiation. So the question is, how do they spin that as a government to show that they are still making the best of Brexit and trying to use those Brexit freedoms to the max?
OK, for now. Thank you. Rest of today's top stories for you now. Here's Gareth.
Yes, good morning. We'll start with Australia, shall we? One person's been killed. Thousands of others have been forced to flee from floods in northeastern Australia. Sky News Australia reporter Lauren Forbes is at the centre of the floods in Townsville and has this update.
Well, the floodwaters here in Townsville have receded, but the danger is far from over. More relentless rain is on the way. Now, I'm located in one of those low-lying areas near one of the main rivers, the Ross River, that have been ordered to evacuate, causing thousands of residents to flee as of yesterday afternoon. Now, they are being warned not to return despite these floodwaters receding, and that's because it could quickly turn deadly. Now, we've already seen this disaster claiming the life of a 63-year-old woman. That's when an SES boat, an emergency boat, capsized yesterday afternoon. Now, at the moment, we have Australian Defence personnel stationed here in Townsville, ready to act if conditions worsen and take a turn for the worse. At the moment, we do have roads, our major roads, the Bruce Highway, which takes you in and out of the city, cut off. And we've even seen bridges collapse from this heavy rainfall that we've copped over the last few days.
Ukraine has struck energy facilities in southern Russia with dozens of drones. It's triggered fires at a major oil refinery and gas processing plant, disrupting flights from the Volga to the northern Caucasus Mountains. Meanwhile, Russia says it's intercepted and destroyed 70 Ukrainian drones over Russian territory overnight, including in Volgograd, Rostov and the Astrakhan region. There have been large protests in Los Angeles against the new immigration policies of the Trump administration, which include ramping up arrests of illegal immigrants and promises of mass deportations. Hundreds of people took to the streets waving Mexican flags and banners and blocked sections of busy highways in the city. And you may have to be shelling out more for your Easter eggs this year. That's because the price of, you're welcome, the price of cocoa is up 143% compared to this time 12 months ago, leading to a steep increase in the cost of chocolate. It's due to extreme weather over Western Africa, where much of the world's cocoa is grown.
That was a cracking joke.
Oh, thank you so much. It was excellent, wasn't it? Yeah.
Enough, Ed. Talk to us about potholes.
Well, there could potentially be good news for those of us who often get quite furious at the state of the roads, and namely the amount of potholes that there seems to be now. Scientists, in a collaboration with Google and King's College London, have found what they're calling a special ingredient which could help solve the problem. So they have been looking at the way that potholes are formed. So essentially, due to wear and tear, cracks in the roads will appear. Then when water enters these cracks and it freezes, it expands, and those cracks turn into these gaping potholes that many of us will be familiar with. Now, they've used artificial intelligence to look at this process in depth, and they've developed an asphalt mix which contains tiny oil particles made from plant waste, and it's shown in their studies that these little spores, release the oil when the cracks appear in the roads and then essentially heals themselves. I thought it was really interesting that the scientists said that they wanted to mimic the healing process that takes place in nature. So, for example, if you and I cut ourselves, you would hope that your body would heal itself, and the same could apply to trees. And now it seems potholes, as the study found, that the roads could heal itself within the space of around an hour.
Really?
Yes.
That's amazing.
And cost-effective and also sustainable as well.
I would have thought one of our regular viewers, Rod Stewart, would be thrilled by this.
Potentially, and it would save him a lot of time. We saw images, didn't we, a few years ago of him shovelling gravel. Well, we can see them now, him shovelling gravel from a lorry to fill potholes in his area in Essex. Not only was it preventing him from driving his flashy Ferrari sports cars, but he also highlighted that ambulances were struggling to drive down that road, and one of them had burst a tyre. So he took matters into his own hands, and who knows, he might want to take part in this study as well.
Tell our viewers why he's good with a shovel.
Well, he has transferable skills, doesn't he, Kay? You told me last hour. Apparently he used to be a grave digger.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He did. He did. And now he's a world superstar.
Yes.
Sue, our director, is very impressed by that. Big fan of the show. He sent me a CD just before Christmas. Yeah,
did you listen to it?
Of course I did. I'm a massive... I think George, Killing of Georgie is probably my favourite. Do you have a favourite?
No.
Maggie May's also
Maggie
amazing.
May's sounds great.
Yeah. Morning, Sir Rod. Big fans. Still to come on The Breakfast Show for you. Changes to school inspections come under fire from critics.
That was a part. I played the part. I'm not that man.
Superman, in his own words, we hear from the son of Christopher Reeve about a new documentary chronicling the actor's life.
I'm Dominic Waghorn, Sky's International Affairs Editor, covering a world that seems to be unravelling. War, unrest, revolutions.
It's not his country, it's ours.
They have succeeded for the first time in their country's history in removing a leader from power.
No freedom!
Sky News, the full story first. There was fighting here, but there's clearly now a lull, and they're using it to bring up more ammunition. This is a mass exodus in which Russia is hemorrhaging some of its brightest and its best. According to the local weather channel, there have been more than 2,500 lightning strikes and flash flooding, all on top of this week's lethal tornado. What stays with you most in this job is some of the people you meet. What is your worst fear about what the Russians want to do to the children?
They're just boosting demographics by stealing young people.
Would you like to take the opportunity, Mr. President, on Sky News to invite Barack Obama to come here? Mr. Trump, are you running for president? Can you confirm it?
We're going to take a look, a very serious look.
On that day, we saw your fighters killing women, killing children. Was that a mistake? Did you go too far? You couldn't control your fighters? The full force of the state is being used to crush any protest. Free wherever you get your news. It's half an hour now past the deadline that Hamas issued, and we've now seen a third barrage of rockets coming in. Another alarm. The mood here is jittery and nervous. We're seeing the world get more and more divided, and it's our job to try to make sense of it all.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people. Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised. If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
Now, it's an iconic character that has been reimagined through comics, television and films since its creation almost 90 years ago. But for many of us, the role of Superman belongs to actor Christopher Reeve, who was the lead in the first big-budget movie about the superhero. After a life-changing accident in 1995 left him paralysed, the movie star becomes a role model for people with disabilities, as shown in a new documentary.
Everybody's looking for a hero. I am not a hero. That was a part. I played the part. I'm not that man.
Hands down, he was Superman from day one.
I realized that if I could pull off this part, it would change my life.
Joined in the studio by the documentary's director, Peter Hedegge, and from Stockholm, Christopher Reeve's son, Matthew. Hello to you both. Matthew, to you, first of all, tell us about this documentary.
So this is the definitive bio-documentary about my father, and we're extremely pleased that it's out in the world, and it's a testament to his character and who he was and the strength that he showed before and after his accident. And it's a very intimate, honest portrayal of an incredible person.
How important was it for you, particularly Matthew, to show just how good a father he was?
I mean, what was important was to show who he was, and he was an incredible actor and performer. He was an incredible advocate and activist after the accident, but he was also just an incredible dad, and he was an adventurer. I mean, he could fly a plane, sail a boat, and we had a lot of fun adventures as a family. But what's also really inspiring was the message that he came to share with the world after his accident, and not just advocating for the disabled, but really sharing a message of inclusion and lifting people up and not demeaning them, and trying to make the disabled community a part of the broader cultural conversation.
Peter, what was it like to make a documentary like this?
It was the honour of a lifetime. I mean, meeting Matthew and his siblings, Alexandra and Will, working with them very closely, they gave us such wonderful access both to their own memories and stories in our interviews, but they also opened the doors on a treasure trove of archive.
What did you want to achieve?
Well, we wanted, I think, one of the great things about Christopher's story is that it's about building bridges between people, between the able-bodied and the disabled, between left and right, and he showed great sort of gentleness and kindness. And I think that example, even when we started the film, there was this sort of rise of strong men across Europe and now in America again. And I think that Christopher he showed a kind of kindness of spirit and a gentleness, and both the way that he approached Superman on screen, but also in his life after the accident, where he was an example of great dignity, of empathy, and he kind of encouraged that in other people. And I think that was one of the things that really spoke to myself and my fellow director, Ian Bonnot.
Matthew, what impact did his accident have on the family?
I mean, any family that endures where someone sustains a spinal cord injury, their life is completely upended. I mean, it is, initially it was a whole new world and a whole new way of living and doing things together and interacting. But what was amazing about my dad and also Dana, my stepmother, was this drive to really kind of keep an element of normalcy as much as possible. I mean, my brother often jokes, as someone who grew up with a movie star dad who was a C2 vent-dependent quadriplegic, we all had a very normal upbringing. So we used to do a lot of things together, but then after the accident, we just spent time together and those things changed. So we would maybe go to the movies or go to the theater or go to art galleries, or more often than not, we would just sit in his office and talk, which in hindsight was an incredible gift and a luxury to be able to do that, because I think not a lot of teenagers really spend that time with their parents and maybe not their father.
And when you look back at the movies, particularly the iconic one, how does it make you feel?
I mean, just bursting with pride. He just did such a fantastic job in that role. And it's really remarkable also, I think, I would now argue my second favorite film of this is this documentary, because it really, has reintroduced his story to people who may have known it and not remembered everything about it, but then also just to introduce him and who he was and what he did to a whole new generation of people who might not remember his portrayal of Superman or his life after the accident.
Peter, that must make your heart swell.
Oh, it really does. I mean, it has been such a joy to work with the kids. And in fact, we started out thinking we were making a portrait of courage and heroism, but we wound up, I think, very much making a film about family and the extraordinary legacy that Christopher left behind, both through his children, but also through his foundation and the advocacy that the foundation continues to do on behalf of people with severe and not so severe disabilities.
Mm. When you first came up with the idea, you must have thought, perhaps the family won't want to be involved.
Well, to be honest, the family came with the project when it came to us. We'd made two films. We'd made a biographical documentary about Alexander McQueen, and we followed that with a film about the Paralympic movement. So, in a sense, it was a sort of like a preparation for a film that we didn't know was going to come to us, which was this project. And it was introduced to us via an archive researcher who'd reached out to Matthew and said, would there be interest in making a film about your father? And Matthew and his siblings said, well, who would direct it? And luckily, I think that Matthew had seen McQueen and Rising Phoenix. And so we then started meeting with them and talking to them about and evolving the film, as we talked to them.
Mm-hmm. How do you remember it, Matthew?
Exactly as Peter said. I mean, their names were brought to our attention, and then I watched their films and thought they were both outstanding. And then we had a series of Zoom calls, I think it was, and then eventually it just happened that my siblings and I were all in New York at the same time as Ian and Peter were. So we had a really long lunch and we talked at length, and I think it became quickly clear that they were the right guys to do this, and that they would treat the story with the respect and sensitivity that it deserved, but also maintain sort of the objectivity that it needed and have a bit of distance, which is why, it became a giant trust exercise. I mean, once we agreed to participate, give our home movies, we stepped back and took our hand off the wheels, and these guys ran with it. And that trust was immensely rewarded when we saw the final cut about 2 years later. Or not quite the final cut, but yeah, a version of it.
Peter, where can we see it?
On Sky Documentaries, which is lovely because it's kind of like bringing the film home. It was made by two British-based companies. As you can hear, Matthew grew up in the UK. So in spite of the fact that we think of Superman as such an American subject, it is a British film, and it's wonderful that it's now available to British audiences.
Fantastic. And finally, Matthew, why are you in Stockholm? Do you live there?
I do live here, yeah. My wife is Swedish, and we're raising our children here, so this is home for now.
Fantastic. My second favourite city in the world. Thank you very much indeed, both of you, for taking the time to join us. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Still to come on The Breakfast Show for you here on Sky News. Ofsted criticised over its new school inspection system. We speak to its boss next. Hello again, everybody. Welcome back to The Breakfast Show. Coming up, the head of schools regulator Ofsted will be here to talk about inspections.
But first, our top stories for you this morning. Global stock markets have slumped this morning after Donald Trump launched what appeared to be a global trade war. The US president has already announced levies on Mexico, Canada and China, warning he'll impose tariffs also on the European Union. The government has reacted to potential tariffs, saying the UK and US have a fair and balanced trading relationship which benefits both sides of the Atlantic. Sir Keir Starmer is in Brussels today to attend a meeting of all 27 EU leaders. It's the first time a Prime Minister has joined the talks since Brexit. The suspended head of Spanish Football Federation, Luis Rubiales, is on trial in Madrid over allegations of sexual assault. The case relates to a non-consensual kiss of the star player Jenny Hermosa, who was part of Spain's World Cup winning team. And Beyonce has won the prestigious Album of the Year award for the first time at the Grammys. That's despite being nominated on 4 previous occasions. The American singer was handed the award by emergency services, who helped with the recent California wildfires. Other winners included Kendrick Lamar, Chappell Roan and Sabrina Carpenter.
Under new proposals being put forward by Ofsted, schools in England could soon be judged using a colour-coded 5-point scale. One-word grades were scrapped after the death of head teacher Ruth Perry in 2023, following the downgrading of her school from outstanding to inadequate. Head of Ofsted, Sir Martin Oliver, is with us now. Hello to you. Thanks for joining us on the programme. Tell us about the new scheme.
Oh, good morning. Well, Ofsted exists for parents and for children and their families. And so for the last couple of years, there's been a big debate about the way that we work. And we've listened to parents. And so today we're introducing a new report card designed to raise standards and give parents more information. And we also think that this new approach to inspection will be fairer for teachers and help schools raise standards higher than ever before.
And more detailed?
Yeah, absolutely. More detailed, but more precise. So it's the same things as we've always inspected, but just far more focused. For example, if you're a parent of a child who's got special educational needs, I think you want to look at our reports and say, well, what's that provider like for me? I'll use the word schools, but we inspect early years, nursery schools, colleges, all sorts. But for shorthand in this interview, I'll just say schools. So if you send your child to school and they've got special needs, how does that school perform for them? If your child's high performing, how does that child perform for them? What's the school doing for behaviour? What's attendance like? So we're trying to do that in a far fairer, more proportionate way. And really crucially, if you're a teacher, the standards that we're setting are just the ones that you're supposed to do when you qualify to become a teacher in the first place. So it should work out, I hope, well.
OK, so more detailed, which means more work. How much longer are inspectors going to be remaining at schools in order to carry out that work?
Well, we've got far better information and data. It'll be a very similar timeframe to what we've got now, but we're working on new proposals for the teams that we send in. But that's not a part of today's consultation. That's to come later. And that was a big part of we're an independent department of government, but all government departments have to go through spending reviews, and we're working through that, and we'll announce on that separately. But the focus today is on about these clear toolkits and whether or not, particularly for people in the profession, but more importantly for parents, does this give you the information that you wanted? People said that they didn't want the summary judgment, but they did want clarity and they did want a report card. So I'm checking today and for the next 12 weeks whether this works.
So more detailed and so more work, but you're not going to be spending more time doing that?
Well, no, it's the different way of inspecting. So we have a current methodology where we go into schools and we do deep dives, as we call them, into a small number of subject areas. We're going to change the teams and change their focus. But really importantly, the clarity that we provide on the toolkits that go alongside the judgments, both for teachers, head teachers, and if parents are interested, will make it really easy for them to say, well, am I performing at this level? And it really won't be a hidden guess what's in the inspector's head moment. It will be, well, are you doing exactly what we described there? And remember, the standards that we're writing are the standards, the professional standards that head teachers, or the legal guidance that schools have to follow. So if they take the time to read this, they should say, well, actually, you're just checking that I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. Exactly that.
But if you're spending more, if it's going to be more detailed and on different topics, how can you not be spending more time doing that?
Well, there were ways of deploying different teams and the sizes of the teams. And so we're looking at all of those things. But we look at each and every single one of these elements now. It's just that we have a blunt instrument of reducing it down to previously one word. So it's all good for the entire thing, or currently just 4 areas. So take the 4 areas we look at now. The first one, the really important one, is the quality of education. That looks at the curriculum, how well teachers teach, and how well children achieve. So we look at all 3 things. It's just that we use one blunt word to describe all 3. I'm simply doing the same thing now, but looking at all 3 areas with greater clarity, much sharper focus, more precise, like a laser light rather than a floodlight. And we're just going to look at each of those individual components. So it's a very similar approach. And that's why I talked about it being it's an evolution rather than a revolution. The revolution is the way that we present it to parents. Does it work for them?
So a similar approach, you call it. The sister of Ruth Perry, the head teacher who took her life, calls it a rehash.
Yeah. And look, I know not everyone's going to be happy with this approach or great, but clarity of accountability of schools is not a nice to have, it's a must to have for parents. We've listened to parents, they're really clear. We undertook last year the largest survey in Ofsted's long history. And people are overwhelmingly, both people who work in schools and nurseries and colleges and parents said, look, we don't like the single word summary judgment. Both groups said this. And then parents, more than 3/4 of them said, but we do want clarity of individual grades. Now, to reduce the pressure, we've actually separated out these points to be more focused. And this will really help teachers, I think, focus on the key areas rather than just worrying about everything. And so be able to focus on those parts. And the way we carry out inspections, you talked about the inspection methodology. Well, we're going to be monitoring schools far more regularly, working alongside them. Rather than done to, this is going to be done with. It should feel far fairer. It should be far clearer. But crucially, it should report to parents on the things that they've told me matter to them.
OK, Sir Martin, it's good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's see what the teachers think about it all. Daniel Capady, General Secretary of the National Education Union, is with us now. Hello to you, Daniel. What do you make of it?
Well, Kay, I really appreciated your line of questioning there on the Chief Inspector because, of course, 2 days is not enough time and Ofsted do not have enough resource to make reliable judgments when there are now going to be 8 areas of judgment on a 5-point scale. So that's 40 potential judgments that can be made in that 2-day period. Sir Martin was tasked with a simple task to create a system of inspection that reduced pressure on the school system following really tragic circumstances. And unfortunately, we think, with the Nando-style colour rating on these 8 areas of judgments on a 5-point scale, that's going to add pressure to the school system, not reduce it. But also, it's intellectually inconsistent and won't give parents a reliable report on the school.
So what should it look like?
Well, we could look towards Canada for an example, but the fact of the matter is, pigs don't get fatter the more you weigh them. It's not inspection that improves schools. We want to see, work done over a period of time to see schools improve properly.
I thought you were going to test me with a maths question then. What do they do in Canada? What is the difference?
Well, there's inspection at a higher level, but they focus on school improvement rather than just short-term inspections, working with schools over a period of time. What this will lead to, what Sir Martin and Ofsted are proposing, is going to make the system worse, not better. For example, currently schools are more likely to be given poor Ofsted judgment judgments if they are a school in a deprived area, and that will remain. We know that 40% of the attainment gap is created before children start school. So, with this current proposal, children are expected from deprived areas are expected to do the same in national tests as their peers. So quite simply, we're going to see more schools in deprived areas being given poor judgments.
OK, good to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
The suspended head of the Spanish Football Federation, Luis Rubiales, is on trial in Madrid over allegations of sexual assault. The case relates to a non-consensual kiss of the star player, Jenny Hermosa, who was part of Spain's World Cup winning team. The 34-year-old striker is the first witness in the trial and has been giving evidence this morning. The kiss triggered a national Me Too moment in Spain. Rubiales denies the charges and said he was the victim of a witch hunt by false feminists. If found guilty, he could face a prison sentence of up to 4 years. Also, just want to bring you this breaking news just reaching us here at Sky Centre. This row between the US and Europe. The European Union Foreign Policy Chief has said if the US and Europe start a trade war, the one laughing on the side is China. Although remember, of course, that China is also supposedly being caught out with a 10% increase in trade tariffs, or a 10% trade tariff, I should say. But nevertheless, the European Union Foreign Policy Chief says if the US does what it says it's going to do and put tariffs on European trade, then the only people laughing will be China. Let's see how that develops throughout the course of the day. Could be worse, could be Canada or Mexico. Still to come on The Breakfast Show, we speak to the record-breaking rower who's just completed a solo voyage across the Atlantic. But it wasn't without some very close calls.
I'm Dominic Waghorn, Sky's International Affairs Editor, covering a world that seems to be unravelling. War, unrest, revolutions.
It's not his country, it's ours.
They have succeeded for the first time in their country's history in removing a leader from power.
No freedom!
Sky News, the full story first. There was fighting here, but there's clearly now a lull, and they're using it to bring up more ammunition. This is a mass exodus in which Russia is hemorrhaging some of its brightest and its best. According to the local weather channel, there have been more than 2,500 lightning strikes and flash flooding, all on top of this week's lethal tornado. What stays with you most in this job is some of the people you meet. What is your worst fear about what the Russians want to do to the children?
They're just boosting demographics by stealing young people.
Would you like to take the opportunity, Mr. President, on Sky News to invite Barack Obama to come here? Mr. Trump, are you running for president? Can you confirm it?
We're going to take a look, a very serious look.
On that day, we saw your fighters killing women, killing children. Was that a mistake? Did you go too far? You couldn't control your fighters? The full force of the state is being used to crush any protest. Free wherever you get your news. It's half an hour now past the deadline that Hamas issued, and we've now seen a third barrage of rockets coming in.
Another alarm. The mood here is jittery and nervous.
We're seeing the world get more and more divided, and it's our job to try to make sense of it all.
Mandatory evacuation, you must leave!
For many people, Harvey is far from over.
People here believe the water will be this deep for weeks.
I'm Greg Milam, and I'm Sky's Chief North of England correspondent.
Are you trying to run me over, Sir Philip?
No, go away.
Look like it, sir. Will you respond to those who made accusations, Sir Philip?
Can you go away?
Sky News, the full story first.
And again, everybody, welcome back to The Breakfast Show here on Sky News Monday morning. A 21-year-old student from Loughborough University has made history to become the youngest person and first female to row solo across the Atlantic Ocean from Europe to mainland South America. But it wasn't all plain sailing. Zara Lachlan joins us now from French Guiana. Hi, it's good to see you. Thanks for joining us. Tell us about it.
I had a really good time. It was the most unique and new experience that I've done so far. And there were some really hard moments, but I enjoyed every single day.
Tell us about some of the hard moments.
I had some very unhelpful, unpredictable weather for the first 3 weeks when I was heading down to the Canaries. And it meant that in my first 39 days, the weather was only with me for 4 of them, when after the Canaries, the weather was only against me for 9 hours. So it meant that I was going around in lots of circles and I was rowing for very long days and not actually getting very far. And knowing that I still had 3,000 miles to go after that was really, really difficult.
What did that do for morale?
Crushed it. Every single day I wanted to stop and just go home. But I carried on and I knew that the weather would change. And it did. And then after the Canaries, every single day, the weather was with me and it was so much better. And it was just really amazing.
Any pesky animals you encountered along the way?
I saw orcas, but they left me alone, which was really good because they do sink boats off Portugal, which is where I was at the time when I saw them. I had some sharks follow me, but not bother me. I was bitten, actually, about last week by a large fish when I was just about to get in the water. My feet were dangling over the edge of the boat and a fish thought that I was a small fish and it bit me and my foot bled a lot. But overall, all the animals wanted to be left alone, so they were very in their own world, and it was just nice to be able to see them and appreciate them for what they were doing.
When did you sleep?
I slept. I had 16 hours of rowing, and I would sleep in 2-hour chunks twice a day, and then a half-an-hour nap in the middle of the day.
How did you manage to sleep? I'd be worried about where I'd be or what might happen when I was asleep.
But the boat beeps if anything goes wrong, and also you need sleep. I couldn't not sleep for 3 months. I needed to be able to make sure that I was resting enough so that I could still make rational and sensible decisions. Sometimes I didn't get that sleep, so in my last day I didn't get to sleep for 40-something hours because the currents were too strong for me to stop rowing. But generally I tried to get about 5 hours a day split into 3 chunks.
Huge congratulations. What happens next?
Thank you very much. I fly home to England this evening, but then I'm going straight back to university because lectures actually started today, so I need to go back.
But what's your next challenge?
Well, I'm not sure. I really enjoyed the ocean, so maybe something to do with water again, or maybe something completely new, but I have had a lot of help from Team Forces, so I think if I want to do anything else again, they'll support me.
Great. It's good to talk to you. Thank you. Safe flight home. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. French Guiana is where she is. Did you know? Full of fun facts this morning.
Go for
French Guiana is where our satellite launched from in 1988.
Oh, wow.
I know. Full of fun facts. Tell me some fun facts about Beyonce.
About Beyonce. Well, Beyonce is, of course, breaking records at the Grammys. We spoke earlier about her win, of course, Country Album of the Year. She won Album of the Year and has now reached 35 wins overall at the Grammys. But she's actually not one of the biggest stories of it. Of course, we've had a lot of first-time winners at the Grammys this year. Chapel Roan won Best New Artist, got Sabrina Carpenter.
Her.
I know, right?
Love her.
So you're not about country music, but you are about a Pink Pony Club.
Yes, exactly that.
Hey, I love your music taste. You know that?
You don't like Taylor, though, do you?
I like Taylor as well, but what do you think about Sabrina Carpenter?
Okay, bit girly.
Yeah? But Espresso, it was kind of everyone's song last year.
Don't ask me, I haven't got a clue. I haven't got a clue about that.
Mario's busy having a brat summer.
That's the thing. Well, speaking of Brad Summer, Charlie XCX won her first few Grammys as well yesterday. And this is one that actually I didn't notice until I was going through the whole list. But John Lennon and Yoko Ono's son, Sean Ono Lennon, he actually won his first Grammy yesterday too. That was for the special limited package, repackaging his dad's album, Mind Games, for it.
Not just his dad.
Yeah.
Wasn't it the Beatles? No, it was just his dad.
I think so. Mind Games,
okay. Yeah. Okay, my bad. What about you? What sort of music taste are you?
Oh, well, I do like Beyonce. I am a fan of Beyonce. I'm glad that she finally won Album of the Year. Yeah. And, well, and the fact that the last black female artist to win it was Lauryn Hill. That was 26 years ago.
Doesn't mean it was a good album.
Lauryn Hill's album was incredible.
Yeah, that was.
Yeah.
Not this one.
No, I don't think it would have beat that.
I think it was just
I Will in the middle.
It was a Tortured Poets Department album is what she was going up against for this year. And like that, like you're saying about Beyonce's, maybe they're not the two strongest albums that the both artists have released this year. I still liked Beyonce's, and that's it. I loved her songs in it, but it's not her strongest of her whole catalogue.
No. What's your favourite Taylor song?
Oh gosh, I'm not a Taylor Swift fan. I'm not.
You're just going to shake it off.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean...
Also not.
Yeah. Shake It Off, I know that one.
No. Yeah, OK, that's the only one you know. What about Who's Afraid of Little Old Me?
I don't know what that is.
Oh, it's a sensational song.
Are you a hidden fan of Taylor, or do you love
No, I'm not hidden at all. At all.
I'm Googling to find Taylor Swift songs. Come back to me.
He's like, pressure.
And what about this frock, or lack of frock?
The lack of frock, yeah. So just as the red carpet was coming on, Kanye West and his wife, Bianca Censori, they attended the red carpet of it. He actually was a guest. A couple of rumours were saying that he wasn't a guest and he had showed up, but he actually was because he was nominated in the song category. But yes, Bianca showed up in a fur coat and soon got rid of that fur coat and just had a couple of pieces of fabric covering certain parts of her body.
Did she?
She had a couple of, little pasties, but that was about it.
We've had to censor Miss Censori.
Yes.
Yeah.
So for me, I don't like the way that he is looking at her on that red carpet. I don't know what's going on. We were talking about this earlier, weren't we, with Caroline Frost, and obviously we're tiptoeing through the raindrops here, but it's not for me. That's all I'm going to say. I'm just going to leave it there and see how that story develops.
Very much so. Well, it started, didn't it, earlier in the year when he said she wouldn't be wearing any trousers this year.
Yeah.
You know, he said that about her. There's weird optics going on.
Yeah.
They do a lot of photo ops, and most of the time she is dressed quite similarly as well.
Yeah.
So it's just the first time that it's been on a red carpet.
And they were asked to leave, or certainly they left before they were expecting to?
Well, that was the rumour, but TMZ is actually reporting that they decided once the cameras got their pics and got their videos, they went into the car and went home and didn't attend the ceremony. It was their own choice.
But wasn't he up for a Grammy?
He was up for one, but decided not to attend.
Because he knew he wasn't going to win?
Pretty much.
How important are the Grammys?
It is. It's a major milestone. It's considered like the Oscars of the music industry, but like that, when we're seeing Beyonce being like one of the biggest artists in the entire world and never winning Album of the Year, it kind of does put into question, is it the biggest deal when someone like her, who has unbelievable albums in her back catalogue, ends up not winning these prizes? It does tie into question, is it important, is it not?
You know how I feel about awards ceremonies?
How do you feel about awards ceremonies?
Not very.
Too long?
No, even in our industry, I think that the person who should win the award doesn't necessarily win. I think there's a lot of politics behind awards ceremonies, and I'm sure that transfers into the music industry. Oh, I'm on my high horse.
Oh, yeah.
My hair's blowing in the wind.
Ask Kay about the Beyonce album again.
That one that was overplayed on Insta all the time.
Texas Hold'em.
Yeah.
I think the thing that is weird is Beyonce had some incredible albums.
Yes,
so it does feel weird that out of all of them,
So you
this is
agree
the
with
one
me,
that
aren't you?
wins. No, I agree that I don't think it shouldn't have been the one that won. She should have already have won it. That's the problem, right?
What's interesting is that there is speculation that potentially this album actually appealed to the conservative judges slightly more. They may have actually been interested in country music as a genre. So I think.
Oh, they were listening to Kanye.
And it was Jay-Z said it last year at the Grammys, saying that like for an artist like her to never have won, it raises certain questions. But yeah, winning country album of the year, that was a big surprise for her too, and that's kind of what she spoke about in the awards speech, because she was saying it's time to not look at genre as something that we should hold ourselves to. If we like music and if we're passionate about it, go for it.
Dolly Parton for us.
Dolly Parton for us, 100% every day of the week.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, and nice that the firefighters gave her the award as well. That was nice.
That was
nice.
lovely. And for Sue, who's our director, saying the firefighters, are they a band? No. Wilfred Frost is next. We'll see you tomorrow.
Mandatory evacuation, you must leave!
For many people, Harvey is far from over.
People here believe the water will be this deep for weeks.
I'm Greg Milam, and I'm Sky's chief North of England correspondent.
Are you trying to run me over, Sir Philip?
No, go away.
Look like it, sir. Will you respond to those who made accusations, Sir Philip?
Can you go away?
Sky News, the full story first.